Welcome to this meeting of the South Burlington School Board. I want to begin with an item that's not actually on the agenda, but just to say thank you to the community and to the members of our budget advisory group and to the administration and all the folks who worked hard to present, and to my colleagues on the school board, to thank you all for the hard work that resulted in our budget being accepted by the citizens. I think it's really a tribute to the fact that education is very much the heart of this community, and people value our school district and what the work that goes on here and the work that our teachers and staff members do. And I'm just delighted that we did manage to pass this budget. It is not the budget that I would love to have had for our staff and students. It's a budget of shared sacrifice, but I think the community recognized that it was a budget of shared sacrifice, and its support is really gratifying to me, and I'm sure to every one of my colleagues. So we thank you very much.
So I'm a little bit out of order because we need to, the next item is we need to entertain a motion to nominate a chair and also election of the clerk. So before we get going, again, I thank you, Mr. Cassidy, for that. But at this point, I'd like to entertain a motion for a nomination of the chair.
So I'd like to make a motion that Rich Cassidy continue in his role as chairman.
So moved. Second?
I'll second.
We have a second. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Motion is approved. Welcome back aboard.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you to my colleagues. And the next item is the election of a clerk. And is there a nomination or more than one nomination for clerk?
I would like to nominate Elizabeth Fitzgerald for clerk and continuing in that position.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? Elizabeth, congratulations. Thank you for being willing to do this work.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rich.
I know my colleagues do. And with that, we also need to designate a school board member to sign contracts on behalf of the board. And I never can remember whether that is the same person as our clerk or that is in addition to our clerk.
Can be the same or it can be different. It's really
Could be, it's our choice.
a choice.
Okay. Is there a nomination on this front?
I nominate Elizabeth Fitzgerald.
I second that.
Are there any other nominations? If there are no other nominations, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, aye? So you're designated.
Guess I'm
Thank you
doing that
again
too.
for being willing to do that. And the next item we want to take up is, again, out of our usual agenda order. That is a consent agenda. And so let's move to the consent agenda. There's a motion to amend the consent, or there's a need to amend the consent agenda?
Yes, to add.
To add two resignations. Paula, is it Jensfold? Who is a .50 full-time educator at Central School, and Alexis Scott, who is a .5 full-time equivalent also at our Central School.
Correct.
Is there any objection to the consent agenda being so amended? There's no.
Just, I mean, and to clarify, they're going to be each .5. That's what they're saying, correct?
Mm-hmm.
They're not resigning their
Whole.
because right now
Right.
they are .5 as
They're-
well.
In a job
currently.
share.
That's correct.
And they're going to continue that for
But
another year.
they are to be recalled to a full-time position. And
Okay,
so
and
they
then-
have a decision to make that will reduce them from a full-time
I got
to
you.
a half-time,
All
which
right.
they currently are right now.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
I understand. I
Contractually.
understand. I understand.
So let me restate this so that I'm sure I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Both of these teachers are presently working half-time. They're being recalled to full-time. They wish.
To make a decision to do that.
Okay, and the decision they want to do is to resign one half of their jobs.
Right. It's actually under the job share guidelines requirements, and so I'm upholding the job share guidelines. They are resigning as a result. They have a choice: go back full time or be reduced to the .5.
Okay.
Yep.
So the agenda's been amended to include that without objection. And do we want to take up the consent item, consent agenda at this time?
I think that was a motion.
Thought that, okay. There's-
Want to do the public first?
Ordinarily, we would, yes. But we're getting our agenda in order, so is there a motion to take up the consent agenda? And where do you want to put it, Julie? Right after comments from the public?
Is that
Okay.
possible?
Is there any objection to Julie's motion? There's no objection, that's what we'll do. We'll take up the consent agenda at that point. So that takes us finally to comments from the public. Sorry to be so long. Are there any comments? Okay. There being none,
We do have these two items that are removed also.
okay.
So that's- sorry.
We're going to drop item 12, the school year calendar, from this agenda, and we're going to drop board development, harassment of employees from this agenda. If there's no objection to that, to those changes. If there's no objection, then the agenda is amended in that respect as well. Lisa, did you want to say something, or?
No, I have a comment.
All right,
Based on one of the dropped items.
Yes.
It has to do with the school year calendar.
yes.
So as a parent, I would like to encourage administration and the board to be very sensitive to the religious observations of the, specifically the Jewish community, but also the other religious groups that represent, our students represent. In the last few years, on the Jewish holidays, we've had sports pictures scheduled for all the high school teams. We've had Nature's Classroom scheduled for students that had to be brought back to this community. We've had exams during class times, and when teachers were asked to reschedule because of the religious conflicts, the teachers chose not to. And the students have to come in on their own time to make up the exams. And just asking for a more a policy, if we could, to just have some sensitivity during those holidays.
So that sounds like a very reasonable request.
You know, Burlington offers one of the two Jewish holidays off, as does Chittenden South now. And it's just an awareness that, you know, population.
And I was starting to think about your request by saying to myself, well, you know, this is really a matter of negotiation between us and the other school districts, because we largely work on a joint calendar with the other school districts in the county. Where are we with respect to that, David?
Again, that's been firmed up. That's part of my desire. You know, we have that currently firmed up from them.
Mm-hmm.
You can make exceptions to the common days by requesting a waiver. By and by, what we try to do is within the county, we try to stay consistent with common days in which we're going to be in school. If you have to add additional days, then you have to go back out and do that, because again, it's based on 175 legal obligation days. So then we go back out and add those. But of the 175, we have what we call common days in the area, and we try to stay consistent to that, unless we have to go out and ask for a waiver. So I certainly hear the request, and we'll do our very best to honor what we can.
And some of what Lisa's talking about doesn't really relate to the common calendar exactly, because things like sensitivity around rescheduling exams, that's within our own control.
Yeah, and I don't, certainly, again, I want to say that I'm very sensitive to try to honor this. At the same time, it becomes not easy to try to add in the extra days, given some of the other components that are at play. So, and then that's not just for holidays, there's a variety of things in there where we try to add in. When we begin to add in, it's like, okay, where are we gonna get that day? So, but point taken, and what you'll see on the 20th will have some, you know, specific eye on that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
You know, the contract that I work under is modeled after the teacher's contract, and does not allow for time off without pay. And I know that contract is supposedly going to be rewritten. I don't know where that is in the whole process, but as a non-union support person that's part-time for the school year, I have a pool of 2 days to take personal and vacation and religious observations. I mean, you have 2 Jewish holidays falling within a calendar week, that's all I have, is to do that. A provision for time off without pay would be a wonderful addition to that contract to be used for situations like that. There's just not enough days. You know, teachers have a certain number of vacation days, plus personal days to take the 2 holidays, whereas some of us don't.
I understand. Okay, thank you. I guess that does take us to the consent agenda. And,
There's 2 areas of that.
all right, you want to talk a little bit about that? Yeah.
So you have the assistant principal at the middle school on there, and you have the 2 hires. So I don't know if you want to talk about, since we're moving that up, sounds like it wants to be discussed, or is it just being moved up to be acted on? Moved up to be discussed, I believe.
I'd like to hear the discussion about the assistant principal hire. I'm not as concerned about the other portion of the consent agenda.
Okay. So you want to make action on the 2, or you want to do AP first?
Maybe if you're ready to talk about the assistant principal,
Sure.
we could just talk about it, and then perhaps we can keep the consent agenda as small as it is together,
Sure, absolutely.
or maybe not. We'll
So,
see.
yep, so allow me the opportunity, and again, I'm gonna ask Wynn to walk through this, because Wynn worked specifically with Karsten and the team. I had provided you a kind of a rough overview of the process of the hiring that would be going on with the assistant principal. So allow me, maybe, Wynn, I kind of said, you know, a 2 to 3 minute kind of overview, and then allow the board to answer questions if you have questions around the process that has led us to this point with the recommendation of Paul Roon, did I get that right? Yoon, for the position that's currently on the consent agenda. So, Wynn, if you take us through that process that has been in front of people, it'd be great.
Yes, it was a very comprehensive process, and I have done a lot of work on hiring administrators in my former job, so it was a pleasure to work with Karsten on this. We did it on School Spring. We had 87 candidates for that one position. Very comprehensive applications. We, as a committee, Karsten and I went through and vetted kind of the first level, so that our intent was to provide 20 or so of the most viable candidates for the committee to then review. We had a snow day in there, and some of our committee members ended up reviewing all of the ones we had at that point, and at that time there were about 50 of them. And to do a candidate, it takes at least a half hour for each candidate to look through their resume transcripts, all of the details. We had an eye out for diversity, and we had a number of very diverse candidates who made application both from gender diversity as far as ethnic diversity, and again, a very healthy list. We filtered from 87 to 20. The committee then vetted it down to 6. We interviewed 5. Of those 5, there were site visits to 3. One was to Springfield, Mass. One was to Swanton, and the other one was to Leicester. That's in Vermont. Okay. That then reduced it to 2. David interviewed the 2 candidates and made that final decision. As far as the members of the search screening committee, we had 3 staff. We had about 10 teachers. We had 2 parents. We had 4 administrators that were on that committee. We were first in the state to use a new system that School Spring has. It's called Wanderlic. It's a national system that's been in place since 1937, but just this year became a component of what School Spring does. And what it does, in addition to doing the application and the 8 criteria of resume, transcripts, and all those kind of things, it has personal characteristics. In a sense, it's a little bit like a Myers-Briggs, because it has them weigh in on agreeability, conscientiousness, extroversion, openness, stability, commitment to work, integrity, learning orientation, teamwork, and gives a profile, color-coded and numeric, of how those candidates fit that job description. And if that candidate applied for maybe a teacher role and not an administrative role, it would classify those based on the job description. So you wouldn't always score the same. It's how it aligns with the job description and how viable that candidate is. And it gives a very comprehensive scale score in each of those. Again, there's about 10 pages for each candidate. So as we got closer to the final 6 and the final 5, we were able to really hone in on were they in the range of what we think would be a viable candidate based on the Wanderlich criteria. I recognized after they'd gone through this also would be a great profile to use as the evaluation tool for the candidates to set goals. And if they were a little bit low in a particular area as they started, as the finalist candidates started that new role, that would be a good foundation builder. So I went to Jim Fitzpatrick, who happens to be a citizen in South Burlington, and suggested that to him. He did some research, and some of the districts in other states that use School Spring actually do that. So we're going to be doing it as well.
Wayne, can you talk just a little bit about the process by which your committee was able to provide feedback to the process as well?
Right. As the candidates were interviewed by the committee, they were also interviewed by parents, by teachers, by students. There was a feedback process where people filled out sheets that came back to the committee. And no, they did it online. It was an electronic feedback system. And so we had a very comprehensive, during the interview time, it's kind of called the gauntlet. You bring them in at 8, and if they're still standing at 8 o'clock that night, then they're probably okay to consider going to the next level. And while they're here, they interview with different stakeholder groups. So it was a very thorough vetting of their credentials and skills alike.
So I'm happy to answer any other questions. Again, there was a significant amount of time. I then spent, on 2 different occasions, I spent time with each of them, interviewed them, then conferred back with Karsten on what my findings were. And then obviously made a decision to recommend Paul for the position. So that's why he appears on the consent agenda. I think he will be a wonderful addition. He comes with a wealth of what I would say very new, positive experiences and ideas, with not a lot of classroom experience, but what I would say a command of the ability to move forward our district in a very positive way. Move forward the middle school and assist the district in a positive way.
I would just add one other thing that I failed to talk about earlier. Also extensive reference work with numbers of people in each of the current organizations and prior organizations. So as comprehensive a process as one district could carry out, and probably a lot more comprehensive than most actually do.
Right. Is there a motion or a request, actually? Any board member can request that any item be taken from the consent agenda. Is there any such request? Hearing none. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor, please say aye.
I have questions. but
Yes. Okay.
It's appropriate for questions.
That's certainly more appropriate than it would be in a moment.
Yeah, I know. I was waiting for that part.
Yeah.
As I look over this individual's resume, I see kind of 4 positions in 6 years. And I also see that there were, I think it's 3 years of teaching, if you count full-time salaried roles. So basically in a period of 6 years, there's 3 years of teaching and 3 years of, it looks like, administrative type work. A principal intern and an assistant principal of academic affairs. I don't really know, looking at that kind of turnover in positions, as well as the limited teaching experience and then the administrative experience, which seems a little more limited. Is that the typical experience level that we would expect of a candidate coming into the middle school role?
I don't know. I haven't gone through the assistant principal middle school role in the hiring process during my time here. I think it's quite typical for the assistant position, to have not a lot of experience, but somebody who aspires to be in a leadership position that has a proven track record in the places where they've been. And again, I would say that, as I said earlier, he does not have a lot of classroom experience, but he definitely exhibits an immense amount of confidence in content, and has a sense of followership, I think, that is very significant from, the staff that he's been around. And that was very evident by the site visits and the reference checks that were made. And also from my conversations with him and questions specifically asked around leadership decisions, hard decisions, how to move forward, your school, how to really be firm and fair. So I don't really know what typical is, I guess, then. But I feel that he's an excellent candidate for the position.
And how about on the, I assume this position would be part of the SBAA group?
Correct.
How does this individual's or this candidate's salary fit in with the salary scale within that group? Because you had a budgeted salary here. Where did that come from?
The budgeted salary is what we actually estimated in the position turnover. Again, it was a guess. We recognized that it would be someone probably less senior than the person exiting, but it was essentially an estimate that was made. I mean, it was what we had on there, and that's what I kept. It wasn't specific that I was going to stay, right on it or below it, but wanting the right candidate. So in this case, this is where he fell on the schedule.
Based on experience?
Based on the experience that I felt was appropriate for him.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my last question, first of all, I applaud the interview team's efforts to really consider some diversity. I also am very aware that one of the challenges of attracting a diverse candidate into, I'll just say Vermont, let alone South Burlington, is really the sense of community and the kind of resources available and things like that. Have we given any thought to what kind of support we might provide as an employer to really, I don't even know the right word, it really to recognizing that is a potential for turning over this position quickly?
Yes, that was part of a discussion. He has some, roots in the area, and that's part of what's driving him to come back here, or to come here. He's not been here before. So, I do feel that that's an area, and I think, we want to really work hard. This is an area of emphasis for me, along with my colleagues that surround me, to make sure we're doing, not just for administrators, teachers and families, but how are we, how are we doing? And that's been some of our work that I've reported to you in the past around how are we doing that. And I don't have all those answers, but we're going to keep working on it to make sure that as we bring people here, or as families come here, that there's more than just getting them here, but it's more about supporting them and providing them, some of the things that we know are important. So
I might add to that. It's a state law that requires principals to have a mentor for 2 years.
that's a good point.
And so there's a way that we could weave in that kind of support structure that I think meets the interest that you referenced.
Does the mentor have to exist within the district?
No.
Or can it be outside?
It can be outside.
Right.
And so we've done.
often they are.
Yeah, we've done that usually for the administrators. Mentors for teachers are usually within the district. Mentors for administrators, again, it's not an awful lot of time, but it just, again, is a individual that can pick up the phone and not feel pressured to be asking, 15 questions in one day. I'm exaggerating, and that's part of the role, so.
Good, thank you.
I would like to, also just, what I've currently set up is I would like for Paul to come back on the 20th. Karsten Slinter's currently in Germany, he comes back Friday, and I would love for him to be able to introduce him to you and allow for a little bit of just welcoming from the board. So I'd like to be able to do that as well.
Okay, anything else? Any other questions about the consent agenda? If there are no questions, there is a motion to approve the consent agenda, and there's been a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. The consent agenda is approved. And that takes us to election results, which we've talked about, at least to the extent of thanking the community for supporting our budget. I don't know if there's more to say about that. Perhaps it's appropriate to review the numbers. Do you want to just do that, David?
Sure.
Okay.
Again, it did pass, Rich, and as I reported, or as reported to us, it passed, Part A and B both passed. Part A by a larger margin than B, but there was 2,128 yes votes on Part A and 1,289 noes. Part B was 1,880 and 1,502 noes. And so, obviously, both of our board members, Diane Bugby and Martin Lalonde, ran unopposed, but we're happy to have them back as well. The city budget passed, and we have two new counselors at the city side, Pat Novak and Chris Shaw, our new members. So, again, from the perspective of the budget, as you said earlier, a lot of folks, including yourselves, were out communicating the budget. We worked hard to try to emphasize voting early, absentee ballot. I will be working to collect some information from Donna Kinville to find out a little bit more, just so we have some benchmark data around our absentee ballot work, and ensure that we can continue those efforts for the future. So, again, I do believe that, you know, our work is ahead. This represents what I would say an appropriate budget. In this budget, we know that there are some unfortunate situations where reductions have emphasized, and one is with wind down the table here, and teachers. And so, yes, I'm happy that the community has supported it, but we've also needed to make some tough decisions around what we think is appropriate moving forward. So it is what it is, and I think I'm proud to be presenting what we've done so far.
As I just look over at the numbers that you have, they're a little different than the numbers I was presented with last night when I went to Channel 17 to talk with them about the approval of the budget, and they're a little less favorable, really, than the numbers that I had seen before.
Well, again, this was my. I actually sent you a cleaner looking email than this, but these were my notes from Donna, and so maybe there's some minor changes to that.
I don't think it makes an awful lot of difference, but I'll just note, again, by way of thanking my colleagues on the board, that some folks I know from around the state who looked at our results said, you know, this is really an expression of confidence in your board by the community, because a more than 8% increase in the tax rate is not an inconsiderable bite for the community to swallow. And I really think that is true, and I appreciate all the work that my board colleagues did, not just communicating the budget, but getting to this budget. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if there are other thoughts about it. We should share them now.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I had a chance to hear Steve Dale today on VPR, and he was indicating 16 districts had the two-part votes, and 5 of the 16 did not pass Part B on their budgets, and one of those 5 didn't pass Part A either. But it was really 4 that were clean for not passing Part B. So there isn't a lot of precedent set around what some of those districts or supervisory unions will do. But I thought that was interesting information, given that it's the last year of that. And then I also took note of our Part A passed by about 2/3. Yeah. And our Part B was close to almost, not quite 50-50, but close to 50-50.
Yeah.
So I'm glad this is the last year.
Yeah, clearly made it was difficult, I think, for a lot of the voters to understand what that meant.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think the last comment, which I think we've all made an observation on, is really, and we had this confirmed by Donna Kinville, that 28% turnout yesterday was actually higher than the presidential primary last fall, and is a high for South Burlington. Yeah. And that's a little discouraging.
Yeah. The high is not very high.
No, it's not very high. No.
So there's a part there, you know, I think around, you know, obviously we have no's in there. It would be nice to help understand what we can be hearing from them. If they're interested in providing information, we're available and open. I'd love to hear from them. And, yes, and ways in which we can help people to get out, more individuals to get out and vote is, I think, again, a targeted area for us to try to improve.
You know, that raises another point I meant to bring up before the board before. I'm sure all the members of the board read the multi-part series that was in the other paper based on, I guess it was Vince Bolduc's polling. And there was very little in the what was published about education, but what was published was that it's a very high priority for members of the community. And I don't know whether there's more data than it was published or not, but I think it would make a lot of sense for us to check with him and see if he has any more information, because he might know more than we know about what the community's thinking about the district, and there might be some things we can learn from that if he does. I don't know, David, could you give him a call?
Yeah, and I think this goes right in line with kind of the data that I would like from Donna, just to know more about, you know, what were the metrics part of the voting, and to be able to put all that together and to know more about it. So yes, Vince is, you know, very approached me and asked about this, and his students were doing this, and he's been very, you know, very agreeable to this. And as you know, Vince is also making note that his son-in-law was George Cannon, and so he continues to be connected to us in a lot of different ways. Will do.
You know, another quick observation, as we developed the budget for this year, I know we got a little bit of a preview of what 2014 was going to look like. And I know this just passed last night, but one of the takeaways I feel strongly about is that it's just not too soon to be thinking ahead. And I know I don't think it's on the agenda tonight, but the financial strategic planning committee,
Yes.
I think the sooner we can kind of get that working group going and focused on not only the changes that are going to happen in education funding, but the effects of sequester, as well as, you know, what our budget is starting to shape up for next year. I think that will be critical.
Yep, totally agree. We're working to get that meeting. And John's been working to get a meeting set up with that group, and I think we're close for our first meeting, right around the corner, along with kind of the 2020 work. What I would say is that, you know, obviously we have a budget that's passed, so that helps with some factors. What we do know is that as we go farther out, there becomes higher variability of inaccuracy, but nonetheless, it's worth putting a factor of inaccuracy on if we have to. There's a lot of things we just don't know, but perhaps we can help influence change that way too, to say it would be really helpful if we knew more about these things through our legislators and some of the folks, perhaps even in Washington, that could help. So we're on it. I think it's a major priority. There's a few other things that, you know, I'll be updating the board on as well, around some next step actions that will be kind of within the first tier of the 2020 work. So I'll be bringing that to you very soon.
And if none of my colleagues have any objection, my plan would be to write a brief letter to the community for the other paper, thanking the community for supporting our budget, and a similar but different letter to the Front Porch Forum neighborhoods, just to say to people, you know, we noticed, we appreciate it, we thank you. So I will do that.
Thanks, Rich.
Yeah, we did actually, Jelina today, we posted online, we did put a message there of appreciation for the support of passage of the budget. So our very visible red, white, and blue vote sign now has, you know, a message underneath it, but I think would be wonderful to have something in the other. I'm happy to help with that too, Rich, and we can talk about that.
Okay, we'll get it done.
Good.
If there's nothing else on election results, that takes us to the status of the Howard Center permit to open a methadone clinic at 364 Dorset Street. David?
Correct. I just wanted to walk through for the public just kind of where we are. I think this has been ongoing, and it's often hard to follow, but I just want to read you basically, where we are as a district in regards to the methadone clinic. On January 29th, the district filed its notice of appeal of the South Burlington DRB decision affirming the Howard Center's permit for the methadone clinic. After the receipt of the list of interested persons, the zoning administrator, the district sent copies of the notice of appeal to all interested persons. Some interested persons have entered an appearance in the appeal, including the Howard Center and the City of South Burlington. On February 15th, the district filed its statement of questions to be addressed in the appeal, and also filed a motion to stay the permit during the appeal. On February 17th, the Howard Center filed its request for admissions to the City of South Burlington, which filed its responses on February 21st. On February 22nd, the district filed a motion to strike the city's response to the Howard Center's request for admissions. And then finally, on February 25th, the Howard Center filed its opposition to the district's motion to stay and its opposition to the district's motion to strike. That's currently where we are today. I have no additional information at this time to report to the board. It does lie with the environmental court, and we're awaiting more information from them. So I don't know if there's questions from the board regarding that in any way. I know there's a lot of legal language in there. I'm happy to answer questions from other folks the best that I can. Any questions?
Yeah, is there any timeline when we might expect to hear back from the environmental court?
I've not been provided that. I think the environmental court, from what I understand, does their very best to be, to respond. I don't know that there's no legal obligation for times regarding this, from what I've been made aware of. So we are in a waiting situation, and I will continue to keep you and the public informed on matters that I am able to do.
Diane, I would just add that my experience is that judges try to get at something like a motion for stay pretty quickly, but the environmental court operates under, I think, a real disability. There are only 2 environmental court judges for the whole state of Vermont. So every zoning and planning decision that's made in the state has the potential to be appealed to the environmental court, and they have quite heavy docket. And then if you even go beyond that, if you compare what they do with what most judges do, most judges have juries that help them decide cases. The environmental judges have to write something every time. They have to write a decision every time they deal with a case. So it was intended to be a more efficient process than the old system, and I think the architects who designed it did not understand that they were putting this large volume of decisions through this very small opening, but represented by 2 human beings who have to do this job. I wouldn't do that job on a bet. That's the short of it.
This information also will be, I'll post the information on the website under school board information related to the methadone clinic. So people will be able to have the opportunity, if they want to read the attached documents that I just identified, they will be available for the public for their reading pleasure. Not so sure maybe reading pleasure is the right word, but reading.
Edification might be the appropriate word. Mm-hmm. All right, that takes us to your report.
So under my report, there are 2 things, and I'm going to ask Wynn to speak to actually both of those, but I think there's some information at your place which is in regards to the nutrition service information. I don't believe you've had the time to read it. I know you haven't had the time to read it because it's at your place. But before I turn it over to Wynn, I mean, I do think that there are options available to us that are available through the Agency of Education that we can take advantage of to study options that may be advantageous for our continued district services. This particular request under the Act 156 for food service is to study the options. It's simply to study options that might be possible for us as we do this. This is one area I think that just quickly highlighting around these consolidation or merger grants that have been made available are actually, I think, very positive and allows a district or a supervisory union to go out and begin doing some thinking as we have budget trends that are likely to continue to happen, where we can start to ask some more difficult questions around how can we do our work more collaboratively, perhaps. And so with that said, why don't I turn it over to Wynn and let's let him walk you through this. And again, I've already identified some of the work that you placed at their table that you probably need to go over.
Okay. I'm looking at the two Act 156 grant applications. And just to give some context, before I became employed in South Burlington, I worked with roughly half of the governance entities in the state around, at that time, Act 153, which was the initial law 3 years ago. It got changed a bit to Act 156, and in that there were two enticements, encouragements with financial support and consulting support. One is called the voluntary merger, otherwise known as REDS, Regional Education Districts. And the two that you have before you are virtual mergers, which are between governance entities like supervisory districts, which South Burlington is one, or supervisory unions, of which there are 46 in the state. And the intent is, we've gone from 110,000 students statewide to about 88 to 89,000, and we haven't changed much the governance structure for how we do business. So the incentive here is to look outside our districts for additional resources, and this is a very apt time to be doing that. The first grant is an outgrowth of the study that we've done on nutrition services that we reported to you last time, and I believe we'll be having a further discussion on the 20th. And from that work, we hired Steve Marinelli, who is in the audience this evening. Steve is the Nutrition Services Director from Milton. And we learned a tremendous amount from the transformation that in 2 years, a year and a half, has happened in Milton. We'd like a similar transformation to happen here. And so the reason that we're moving forward with this grant is to further study how we might conjoin the districts together and share expenses, and also share the valuable resources that Steve and his staff can put before us. So the Joint School Food Service Study is just what it says. It's a study. It would look at the possibility of sharing staff members across school district boundaries and to share resources. And coupled with that, we're also looking at creating a food hub right now, and I would say it's certainly not conclusive. We'd be looking at a food hub located at South Burlington School District that Milton initially and other districts and other nonprofit organizations might work with us to share resources around local produce. Because right now in the middle of winter, we don't have a lot of options. You heard Molly Silver picks carrots in December, but not much is thriving in January, February, and March. So by pre-freezing in the summertime and having available a lot of produce in freezers that we have access to that's aggregated across multiple school districts, we can get a better cost factor for some of our food. So the study would look at what we might do as initial phase one, which might be or might not be between Milton and South Burlington, but then expanding to other districts across the Chittenden County region. The transportation grant, same pool, they're both $10,000 grants. This one is 9 districts, but this one I started back in August or September, and my interest here, and I'm going to be overt with it, this is my doctoral dissertation at UVM, and it's to study the 9 school districts in Chittenden County as far as how we would reduce costs by mass purchasing of buses that might be fueled by natural gas, which is about half the cost of diesel, also much more environmentally friendly. But one of the biggest aspects of the transportation grant is how could we have a uniform transportation system that would allow our students and students from other districts to not have duplicated AP courses in 9 or 8 area high schools, but to have different high schools have different AP courses, and through a uniform transportation structure, be able to take advantage of those, lessening the cost for each district, as well as dual enrollment college courses. One of the barriers right now is transportation. Wealthy kids have cars, they can go. Other kids that don't have those vehicles can't do it. Transportation becomes a way to get that done. So it's an aggregation of resources. It's to look at how we can operate buses more efficiently, and it's worked through the UVM Center for Transportation Research that has very sophisticated software that no one district could ever afford alone, but they can do bus route optimization scenarios that would show what's the most efficient way to pick up kids in and around school district boundaries, across boundaries, or in our district. So I know one of the board questions was, why don't we study our own? We are studying our own, but we're adding another layer of resource that we could never optimize or maximize by not going with other districts.
When these are on my report, and so there's no action
Right.
connected to them.
Right.
So the next step would be answering board questions and coming back with, this is an action item for the board to actually
Right.
sign on to, is that correct?
Well, technically, the Agency of Education just requires that the board addresses this at the board level. I think it's an awareness so that the agency knows that the board has seen it. Again, it's a $10,000 grant. The superintendents in the other districts have gotten authorization from their boards. Their superintendents, many of them have signed this. And once I have 9 signatures on transportation and 2 signatures on the food grant, then it goes to the agency, and hopefully they'll look kindly on this, because the legislature put aside a fairly substantial pot of money for these virtual mergers between school district management teams.
All right. Other questions?
I have a question. It's sort of down the road a little bit after the transportation piece, but in terms of sharing AP courses, for example, do other districts, or do they have the same block schedule that we do? And how would that all?
No.
That's a piece of what we would be looking at.
Okay.
There's been an effort that, I have encouraged, at least our 3 areas, and Patrick has certainly taken the lead on this, to begin talking with Burlington and CVU, and I believe there's interest there. I know there's interest there. But again, as Wynn said, we've got other barriers out there, and it's also about needing to make some pretty bold changes around where you're going to get your service and how you're going to do that. And so I don't know when that may begin. I think it's inevitable that we're at some point going to have to do that. As Wynn pointed out, the loss of our numbers of students are going to make it difficult for all of us to continue to be able to provide the opportunities that we currently have. And we're going to talk about that in just a second when we talk about the Winooski situation, option and study. And very similar, they're probably our advanced location or advanced situation where they don't have the same opportunities, and that's what's put them in this place.
Because I wonder, there's the transportation piece, then the scheduling piece, but then also the school finance piece, and how do you share that ADM?
Right.
And working all of that. I guess that's the next layer.
Right. Well, again, a piece, a example. It may not be. It could be more specific to a science and math,
right.
Technology and the arts. There could be a lot of variations out of this, but part of it is just to study what are the options and get the attention there to say how can we keep programs rich for kids, but at a more efficient cost.
Right.
John had a question, actually. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead, John.
There's on the 2 grants, there's a difference in the nutritional services. It says board vote date, and the transportation one doesn't. So just want to make sure we're.
Well, they both should.
They both have board vote date. I was wondering.
Yeah, no, they both do. First page.
They do?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Oh, it's
So
a lot of districts.
You
Sorry.
do think that board approval is required, or just would be preferable?
Well, this was taken from the Agency of Education's.
Sounds required to me then.
Yeah, because they are not going to consider funding until they get a board vote date.
So part of what I am mindful of trying to provide you information and ask for decisions that are not putting you in the place where it's like you haven't had a lot of time to discuss. We do have some situations currently on nutritional services. You were provided kind of an overview of nutritional services. You haven't really had a chance to digest your requested information that Wynn has provided, the updated preliminary proposal from the Abbey Group. So with that said, you know, I'm feeling that you got a lot of information in front of you and you're being exposed to. I think that the study allows us to give you some additional facts and us some additional facts before we wander in and move into the hiring of our own nutrition service director. And this may be timely for us to use this information as, you know, the hiring process really needs to start fairly soon. You know, we've got a little bit of window, but, so I do think there's some opportunity for you we could bring this back again on the 20th. I think it would be good for a decision sooner rather than later, given these options for the grant.
I don't understand why we wouldn't want to do this, because it's a grant to help us study potential aligning of resources that could save us money. So am I missing some, I mean, yeah, I don't, maybe, do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I do. And I think, you know, I think the idea of grants to, you know, give us additional information that help in the decision-making process is great. I think the idea of focusing on areas that do take us to that next level of looking at coordinating some resources across at least Chittenden County make a lot of sense. I feel like, you know, if I can kind of go through some of my concerns, one is we have 3 grants in front of us tonight, all of which are going to dilute our own district's resources. And we've got a lot of work to do as a district independent of that. So one of the questions I have are these the highest priority things that we are choosing to work on, that administration is choosing to work on? I also feel like the transportation grant, I applaud the fact that it does cut across Chittenden County, but it really looks like it's not addressing the root issue that would lead us to some economies of scale around AP classes and things like that. It's not looking at where there's redundant classes and where there's a need for post-secondary education and where there are extracurricular activities that could be coordinated. It's looking at one element of a barrier to that, which is transportation. So it's kind of a solution in search of a problem. And if I look at the study, it's really, the grant is focused on kind of scale associated with purchase prices, maintenance, fuel costs, but there's no scenario that the scenarios that we've developed are going to be absent of understanding where there's opportunities to consolidate. So to me, it won't give us additional information. It will be an assessment in a vacuum. And then I'm looking at the food grant application, and I know I didn't have the benefit of sitting through the initial presentation 2 weeks ago, but you know, one of my obvious questions are, you know, have we approached, or why wouldn't this grant be written to look at other schools in Chittenden County, inclusive of, I know Burlington got ruled out, but Essex and CVU, schools of scale and demographics and proximity to South Burlington that might make this more of a scalable project. So, you know, those are kind of my concerns: the dilution of district resources, priorities, and are they giving us real actionable information, or is it sort of nice to know, but all we'll have is a little soundbite that doesn't really move the dial?
I'll respond to the transportation grant first. Even though it may not blatantly say it here, the AP courses and the dual enrollment courses are absolutely at the heart of what this is going to analyze. So they are as the primary focus of this, and as I further develop the proposal, those will become more obvious. So you will get data about that. As far as the food service, the transportation got started a lot earlier, so there was the ability to get buy-in from all of the Chittenden County districts. The food service one emerged at the end of our analysis of nutrition services, and with the realization that we were in the process of moving forward to hire a new director, and we have a different option. So to be able to look at either hiring the director or sharing resources with another district with the intent that can expand the other way. In other words, starting small and building. There's a strong interest from the School Nutrition Association directors to collaborate across many districts, but you have to start small and build. So we have two different directions. Transportation starts big and stays big. Food service starts small and builds.
I think the important thing for me is that it does provide, as far as resources, as far as the distraction for us administratively. I mean, this is work that would be hired out to be done. Again, there are going to be conversations with us, but it's not going to be us doing them.
But we have fiscal agents and project directors that are out of our district.
The project director for both of them is me, and one of them is for my UVM credit. So I'm doing this outside of the district, and I'm doing it inside the district. And I'll be doing it long after I'm here. So
again, I think that these are available options to you. Given that what we really need is the support, I think that you ought to maybe take some additional time and we bring it back. Could be a suggestion on the 20th, unless you're comfortable to move forward now. And I'm not necessarily hearing that that the whole board, what you like to do. Again, these are options available to us from the agency. I think tonight it feels like you've got, as Elizabeth indicated, you got 3 of them in front of you, and it kind of feels perhaps unbalanced from the past many years. You haven't had many of these in front of you, so I'm very cognizant of that.
So how many of the supervisory districts, unions have already approved this for the transportation study?
I have, Milton has approved it, Burlington has approved it.
And do you know what the status is? Has anybody said no, or is it not?
No one has said no. All 9 superintendents have supported it. Just a matter of working it through their board agendas.
So each of these, it is going to be recommended to the board,
right,
by the superintendent.
Right, and we're asking the districts for specific data. The contractor in this is the UVM Center for Transportation Research. The grant money will go to them to be able to do the trip optimization analysis for us using their software.
Are there more questions or comments for this evening on this subject? I get the sense that we're not ready to take action this evening, but we certainly can further the discussion. I would add to further the discussion that if you think about the fact that we do face, and all the districts in the county seem to face declining enrollment, and you think about the future, and then you look at what happened in Cabot, where they were asked to close their high school, and they said no. You get the idea that schools are very emotionally connected to their communities, and the idea that we're going to respond to this declining enrollment by closing a lot of schools doesn't seem very likely. So that my thought is, if you imagine the future of education in Chittenden County, I imagine a situation in which there's intense cooperation and collaboration among the existing school districts. I don't know that this is the right way to do it exactly, but you have to begin somewhere. That's my reaction to it.
It doesn't commit you to any, I mean, yes, some resources and some pieces. It doesn't commit you, if there was ever a significant event, a consolidation, I mean, that in many ways has to be to the board and to the electorate,
to the voters,
for approval. So, I mean, I think there's definitely some safeguards in here. Certainly, you haven't had the fiscal plan. You haven't had a lot of time with the 2020, but I'm quite certain that you're going to see that in order to be mindful to our future, we're going to have to think differently around how to continue to provide opportunities for students than we're currently doing it. and that includes many different areas of our work.
Well, if there aren't any other comments or questions on these two grant applications.
Yeah, I did
Martin
want
has
to.
one.
Yeah, go ahead, Martin.
I mean, the transportation study, to me especially, you know, I think your comments are very well taken, Elizabeth, and I think you got to some very good points, but it does seem fairly straightforward, and it does talk about the AP courses in high school, college learning opportunities, and that it's going to be studied in page 3 of the document. And maybe it's a chicken egg kind of question. What comes first, getting the transportation worked out or getting the availability of the AP classes and dual enrollment opportunities? It seems like it kind of goes together, and this seems to focus on transportation. But as I read it, I saw it as kind of an entree or an entry into trying to figure this issue out that we've been kicking around for the last 2-3 years. So I was very encouraged, particularly about the transportation one. And I am concerned about proceeding. I support I think the transportation study particularly is worth proceeding with. And if we wait, how much are we going to lose if we wait a couple more weeks because we have wind here for only so much longer? So, I mean, I prefer to try to push ahead with at least the transportation. I think maybe we have a little bit more time with the food service. I mean, I didn't find anything that particularly aggrieved me in the food service. I had some of the same questions. Why? Nothing against Milton, but why Milton? That was kind of the thing that jumped out to me. Why are we not trying to do this with Winooski? But I understand where your point is, that you have to start somewhere, and this is a place that is readily available to start. And it's definitely, as far as priorities, I think that the board has made it fairly clear over the last several months that nutrition is a priority, and we're trying to proceed with answering the questions. And if this might provide some answers. So, I mean, I am in support of both of these, and I think it'd be great if we could proceed now, but I also respect that if we need more time, especially since Julie's not here, we should revisit it in a couple weeks.
And my reason for thinking we ought not take it up is that it wasn't noticed for action tonight. And we do have an absent school board member, so any member could move to take it up tonight. I don't hear a motion where.
No, I think particularly, unless we're hearing that there's absolutely time critical, I don't think I'm hearing that. I'd also be more comfortable that, I know Julie has an interest in this, really wanted to.
So we'll put it on for the 20th.
Can I just add one thing? I believe Burlington is pursuing a similar kind of venture with Winooski in food
about
service.
Food?
Yeah. So there are other entities that are having these kinds of conversations.
Okay. Well, with that.
Yeah, if I could just add, what would make me feel better about the transportation study would be some specificity about what could be anticipated as the data around enrollment, AP courses, post-secondary, kind of flushing that part of the grant out. And then on the nutrition one, I think the real question is, this starts us down a path of one solution, and just an understanding of, should there be some parallel, like, why wouldn't this grant have been written to include other school districts? And so, I'm a little bit concerned that this starts down a path of sort of one solution, and again, the dilution of district resources. So I don't really know how to answer that one.
All right. That takes us to talking about reconfiguration with Winooski.
And so this is the number 3. So you're feeling reconfigured, I'm afraid, but
Just a small thing like reconfiguration.
this
with
is
Winooski,
actually
that's
this is most specifically under Act 156. There is a desire between Winooski and Burlington to study options, and in their proposal, they also name other areas that should be considered: Essex, South Burlington, Colchester, etc., that will be informed. And so part of what is required is that there's, again, a notice to just inform of this work. And so Winooski has already, we'll be taking it to their board tomorrow night and just informing them of this. And then Burlington will be next week. And so under 156, there's these initial exploration of joint activity options in this grant, and we are essentially just a named participant. And so specifically, the application under 156 reads as following. Winooski is the initial party in the study, with Burlington being fully supportive and involved in considering possible reconfiguration. It is expected that the neighboring districts of Colchester, Essex, South Burlington will be approached as well about joining the study. This work just simply allows you to be joining the study, and I think it is important that we at least be able to be named in the process of looking at options. So this is going to be done by the Vermont School Boards Association, and I think Steve Dale will be assigning an individual to be assigned to look at these options and study it more thoroughly, of which you then would get information back to say, this is what the findings are. So that's really what it is. And I don't know if you have any specific questions.
We're not expected to do anything.
It's just I have an obligation because we're named as a neighbor in this, and we could say no, we don't want to have anything to do with it. This takes us out of the equation around looking at enrollment information, et cetera. I think it's advantageous for us to say, yeah, we're interested in being part of the study, whether it points to us or not. So I was contacted by both the superintendent of Winooski and the superintendent of Burlington to be part of that. So,
David, do we have this language in our packet?
you do not have the language in your packet. I did not have it available to me at the time.
There was at our seats a copy of the,
I think I've got this.
Of the Armando letter.
Yeah.
from the
I do
commissioner.
have copies of this for you, which is a little bit redundant, but, and I can walk you through this, that's one for you, Rich, sorry.
Thank you.
And I'll get one to Julie. On this is information that went from Winooski to Von Altemus, the Agency of Education. And it has Mary Martineau's signature, and then it has the redundant, and that it has Jeannie Collins's as well. And it simply just points to the phases, phase 1 and phase 2. We are named, as I read earlier, in the interest, the other folks that would be approached to be interested in this, so.
Well, I would just say that, I think it's probably appropriate for us to indicate interest in being involved. I'm very discouraged, based on my own conversation, which goes back now 2 years with the Winooski District, about their interest in being involved with us, but that's up to them,
Well, and remember, part of this.
Things may change.
Well, part of this is predicated around a decision that they're needing to make because of their interim, the pressure that the Secretary of Education has placed on them, that it's only an interim superintendent, requiring them to do a study. Requiring is my word, I don't know if that's the right word, but requiring, what I say is a study to look at options before they continue to just proceed.
I mean, I think they're sort of gently being told they may be too small.
Correct.
And that may be true, but I don't get the sense that they're receiving that information.
Well, again, part of that is, again, I don't know
No.
specifically the correspondence that you had a couple of
Yeah.
years ago, Rich, or the
I was
board.
face-to-face with Mary and with the then chair of their board and John,
Yeah.
and as I think I quoted the last time we talked about this, the chair of the school board said, "What's your tax rate?" And we told him, he said, "Well, we're not interested in merging with you."
So I don't know if those are some of the same attitudes that still exist, or as a result of 2 additional years and kind of the
Yeah.
forecast and opportunities for kids, it enters into it. So, I was approached to do this. I think it would be wrong for me for you to find out that there was some dialogue and discussion going on with Winooski and Burlington, and we didn't have maybe the option to consider it.
Yep.
So it's in front of you in that vein, is that we are named under the Act 156. So.
And, we certainly do have a corresponding problem to Winooski's problem, and that is that we have gently declining enrollment, and it would be nice not to have gently declining enrollment, because the extent our enrollment declines too far, our resources are too big to, too large to deal with the students we have, so.
So essentially, I would like this,
We should look.
if possible, I would like just this to be, you know, an action that the board is aware of this, that's all. And based on the language that I
Kathy?
provided.
I just have a question, I don't know if it's appropriate even at this time, but what will the study study? Does that make sense? I mean,
It's a good question.
is it, are they trying to dissolve and split? Are they trying to, you know, go under one other district? What do you think they're looking to do or looking to learn?
Yeah.
Okay.
I did a good number of these. It's called a RED study, Regional Education District. And what it does is it looks at all aspects of operation. It looks at curriculum. It does comparisons of what the resources are.
Well, let me just read the phase for it, I think it would
Okay.
be clear. So what it says is the proposal is to fund phase one, and the phase one is, the first phase would review the current status of the Winooski School District compared to other neighboring districts in areas of student performance, the degree of student opportunities for learning, and the overall efficiency of the district, and would identify desired outcomes for any change that may be recommended, data gathering during this process, et cetera. So it really is looking at the opportunities for kids, and what they currently have, how they're currently performing, as they are children within a very, very near location to us.
So why don't they have that information already? They're talking about their own district?
Well, but they don't necessarily know the intricacies of what's available to others.
In other districts?
That's right. And so maybe they're far better off than we are, and we ought to be emulating what they're doing, right? Or vice versa. We have opportunities for our kids that they need to be considering when they look at the gamut of programs in and around Chittenden County, for instance.
Why would that have had to be mandated from the state?
Well,
Wasn't that
part of, in order for them to receive funds,
Right.
they have to identify what are the things they're gonna look at. If they just said, we want the money because, you know, we just wanna say we're good, well, they have to identify some specific things. Again, and Wynn is pretty aware of this kind of recommendation that happens. And this is in part due to what we know is happening in the state. We have enrollments that are going down and going to continue to be difficult to have the same
Well, it sounds like
options.
some of this is driven by student performance as well, because the first phase
Yeah.
is very clear. It's benchmarking and comparing to
Correct.
other neighboring districts. The second phase is definition of desired outcomes and the both the educational benefits and the financial impact of
Yeah.
options.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty straightforward.
And I think it reflects a discussion that has been taking place in Montpelier, in the legislature and the Department of Education, with what's called the so-called small school problem. You know, and the fact that we have a number of school districts, and many school districts in Vermont with very small schools. It's very hard for those schools to provide a broad range of opportunities for their students, and very expensive for them to provide even the opportunities that they do provide. There's been, I think, a feeling in the decision makers in the state that should result in some change, but there is a real reluctance for communities to do that. So I think it's kind of gentle encouragement. Is that
Well,
the way you read it?
it's not so gentle.
Yeah.
The issue is when your superintendent leaves, the Secretary of Education has the authority
Take it.
to prevent you from hiring a full-time replacement until you do this. And so that's what the two-year interim position, it's called forced choice.
In the grant, it says the Agency of Education requested that Winooski conduct a study to consider a boundary change that would increase student performance, student opportunity, and operating efficiency.
I mean, I see the state threaten its cudgel, but I don't see it swing
leave
that
it for
club,
Well,
you know?
I'll
But
share-
maybe I'm wrong, maybe
I'll
they
share
will.
one that did something about this, and that was the supervisory union in Ludlow conjoined with the supervisory union in Chester to take two supervisory unions and make one. And that was after, at that time, the Commissioner of Education said, "Thou shalt study it." They believed that there was a club behind that, and they also saw the opportunity. They studied it, the state gave them a lot of funds to look at resources, and they did it 2 years ago.
Maybe coming.
Yeah.
So is there objection on the part of the board to the superintendent being authorized to say that we're willing to be involved in this study? I don't hear any.
Well, David said that we're aware of it.
Yeah,
He did, but it's listed as an action.
I think the action could be that I've made you aware, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, I'm just telling you that, you know, we were named in it, for me, not, now I can say my board has no desire to be involved in it, that could be an action. If you stay silent, then I've informed you, I can say I've informed you to move forward. I see no problem with that. But, you know, it's really, your choice on how you want to move forward with it.
I'm still not seeing objection, although I may be
No,
close to seeing.
there's no objection.
Okay, so there's no objection to our participating.
Can I go backwards a little bit?
Sure.
I know now what would make me feel better about the nutritional grant, and it would be the inclusion of some language that's in this grant that says something to the effect that it's expected that neighboring districts, and naming them, would be approached in the future, or something to that effect.
Okay.
All right,
Thank you.
Same.
Yeah.
Sorry to hit you with so many of those at once.
and that takes us on to item 10, administrative reports discussion. And
So-
we're running a little late, but this is an important subject, so let's.
So I've asked Stuart to provide you, now again, you have a pretty good-sized packet of pieces of data. I'm not
yes.
interested in walking you through all of those, but I do think it would be good just to be informed a little bit about some of the changes that have happened in our curriculum, specific to math, and some of the results that correspond, as I think that's an important component for you to understand the data. So I'll ask Stuart to try to be very brief with this. If you have specific questions after that, or would like to dive into some additional slides, we're happy to do that. But, so let me turn it over to Stuart.
So at the moment, I'm just going to have the results of the New England Common Assessment Program up, if you have particular slides. I think if you've looked at the data, we had significant, either the same data or better than we've had in the past. We're continuing to make gains. The area that really is still the weakest, high school SES, which is an area that we're looking at. And obviously, whereas incredible with the high school, but again, it's always important to remember we're always looking at a cohort in the high school where everybody else is, 3rd through 8. So that one cohort may impact the study a little bit, but it's always just the 11th graders at the high school. So, this 11th grade did tremendous on the literacy part, on the reading of the test. But you got to do it for more than 1 year to know that it's really a trend and not just this cohort really is a bunch of good readers. I do want to talk about the math though. Our math scores did go up, but that's based on the program work that we've done before to strengthen and provide more opportunities that are similar to the kinds of problems that they ask on the NECAP. The big change that we've made is in our algebra program for 9th graders. In the past, 9th graders have had the option for kids that we consider to be less prepared in math, did 2 years of Algebra 1. So they did Algebra 1 as freshmen, and then the second part of Algebra 1 is sophomores, which meant that they had geometry at the beginning of their 11th grade year, and then they were taking at the beginning of their 11th grade year a test that tests geometry and Algebra 1, and therefore our results were not as good because the kids had not had the math yet. Or some kids, a good number of kids had not had the math, and about 27% of the kids who got the lowest score had not had the math yet. Not to mention that our math department chair, Jill says that actually there's a lot of Algebra 2 questions on that test, at least in terms of what we teach in Algebra 2. So this, after a couple of years of designing a program, we now have all kids taking 1 year Algebra 1. The kids who are less prepared for what would have been a traditional Algebra 1 program, they actually have Algebra 1 every day. So we work with, we designed a program to really make sure that those kids are at the same place as the other kids at the end of their freshman year. And we're actually looking at continuing that in terms of supports around kids in our lower geometry classes as well. A way to build in over time a 2-day instead of an every other day program to continue to strengthen math. So here's the good news and the bad news is we'll never see the results of that for us on a kneecap because those freshmen will never take the kneecap test when they're juniors. They're going to take the new test, the Smarter Balance test. And so it'll be comparing apples to oranges because that test is going to be a very different animal, you know, based on the new math curriculum of the Common Core, which is the other thing that we're working on. But what I can say is we modeled our program somewhat after Essex that did this 2 years ago. And if you look at their results, their juniors who just took the test who had 62%, which was up from their usually being at about the 50% mark just like us, they actually had algebra and geometry before they started their junior year. So that's not really the same as, you know, we can say, oh, we did it too. We actually have more supports, though, around our Algebra 1 class. So we have a very high success rate right now among our freshmen who are taking Algebra 1 with the supports every other day. So if there are specific questions that people have about any of the slides, kneecaps or math, happy to.
A follow-up to what you were just saying. I mean, do we know, do you know what the Common Core test is going to be like? I mean, can we try to, in advance, start adjusting what we're doing with freshmen and sophomores?
In fact, we are. So let me just, a very quick overview, simplistic view of the changes for high school are not as great as they are through K-8 in the Common Core because it still sits in a traditional math thing of an algebra, geometry, algebra 2 kind of sequence. Some of the emphasis is on model building, on trigonometry. So for right now, in our algebra program, you know, trig tends to be at the end of the book. And we're going to have to do some reordering because that's a big part of the Common Core is that model building and what's more traditionally like kind of a trig kind of look. So we're looking at those kind of things for reordering, in a sense, the order in which things are taught. But it's not as big a change as far as content. What is the change is, again, that question of how to extend a problem, how to look at it in a lot of different ways, even more so than the kneecaps. But of course, Vermont as a whole does that more than a lot of states. You know, a lot of states' math tests are just math facts and not problem solving, which the kneecap has always had. So we do think we'll be at some advantage there. It's just going to be a different test. Finally, there are pilot questions beginning to come out, and actually next year there should actually begin to be packets of formative assessment, 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, even though students will still take this test in the 11th grade. There'll actually be 9th grade formative problems that you'll be able to work with kids to say if they're doing these in the 9th grade, then they should be on track to do this work in the 11th grade. So those haven't been made public yet, but those should be available. The last piece in terms of just the kneecap piece is that there also will be closed high school math and English language arts questions so that we can actually begin to use SBAC type questions to design final exams for our kids so that we'll kind of all be in the same assessment system. It won't be a different kind of assessment than what we do now, which is really, you know, we have the kneecaps and then everything else. We can actually begin to build a common assessment program based on the same kind of assessment that our kids will eventually take.
Can you just address a little bit about, on the elementary side, you know, with the transition to the Common Core, because there's a fair amount of change that's forthcoming.
Well, I did talk about this a little bit last year, I'm happy to give a Common Core review anytime because we begin to know more and more all the time. The piece with the Common Core is this, theoretically, it's less is more, more depth, less spiraling curriculum, so that kids really focus on certain concepts as they go through K-8. So for example, probability was one of those things that at the present time we introduced in the 3rd grade, do it again in the 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, and kids never quite get it. We don't even touch it till 6th grade under the Common Core. So, so that they have a much greater sense of whole numbers and fractions before they start talking about probability. And 3rd grade is very strong multiplicity, and division. And so it's not like drilling, because it's about kids also discovering the depths of why does multiplication work, what are those rules about, but also it is about fluency as well, so that's, the basic theory behind it. There's a lot of shifts in terms of real coherence through the grades. If you do this in 1st grade, this is what 2nd grade looks like. The biggest piece for us will be in the next couple of years as more programs come out. Right now, we're working with Bridges, which is not, aligned with the Common Core. We're looking at ways to make that program work because we don't want to just run out and purchase somebody who says, oh, we're Common Core aligned, because what we're hearing from the experts is nobody's Common Core aligned, and that you'd be spending a lot of money and then you'd have to buy another program. So, this is the hard part in math because we are used to working with programs as we make the transition in the lower grades.
Is that true of the connected math program also at the middle school level?
Connected math is true as well, though the difference is that because we think we're beginning to look in reorder, that if we focus on a few less books and move a few from the different grades, it may be a lot easier to work with the connected math than with the Bridges. What people are recommending is basically look at the key piece of the Common Core, and everything in your math book that's not related, just cross it out and not teach that, and then figure out how to supplement materials in, to help with the pieces where it's weak. So that Bridges would be, instead of 8 units, we might just do 4 of the Bridges units and figure out what's the other unit that we're going to do, and still only do 5, not 8 units in a year for the regular class.
Since we're talking about recap testing and standardized
Sure.
testing, I just want to fill our student rep in on one issue and ask her to think about something if you don't have a reaction tonight. One of the things we've heard in the past when it gets to the older grades, the kids in the high school, is that students don't feel much investment in the tests, that there's nothing at stake for them. And so they don't make much of an effort, or as much of an effort as they might. And my question for you maybe to think about, unless you think you already know the answer, maybe talk with some of your colleagues about is, is that really an issue? Is there a way we can give students a stake in these exams that's practical for us and for them?
I know they've kind of tried to incentivize it by saying if you are proficient or above, then you don't have to take a math final junior year, and you don't have to take your science midterm senior year. And
Yes.
Yes. So I think a lot of kids actually really listen to that and try to do well because of that. But I think Mr. Burke said they did a little bit better last year than the year before that, which is when they introduced the new policy, but I'm not sure.
Just to clarify,
Yeah.
Last year, for the first time in the science test this spring, they were, students were told they wouldn't have to take their midterm in science if they were proficient or better. And this year in math, not in reading, but in math only, they were told that if they were proficient or better. So we believe that 52% versus the 47% is probably, again, given the math that we've taught, about as good as we can get. We think kids really, for the most part, tried, that's our baseline data.
Not hiding behind the fact that we don't think
Right.
they were motivated as much.
Right, because we, at least qualitatively, teachers report that students seem to be working harder than ever before to do it. So what we need to see, obviously, is what happens next year. but also if these math changes over time begin to make a difference. In the long run, I really believe, and I don't know how long it'll be, one of the issues has always been, what does a college want to see?
Sure.
Colleges can't look at the kneecap because they can't compare it to the MCAS. They can't compare it to the test from Mississippi when you're all there in the enrollment. But with the SBAC test and the PARCC test, which is the other one, there'll only be 2 tests, just like there's SAT and ACT now. And so our hope is that eventually colleges will look at the SBAC scores and at the PARCC scores, which we're not a PARCC state, and therefore they will make sense on a transcript because they'll know that they're comparing 16 states, including the state of California in our case, and Pennsylvania, and therefore, you know, there's a national norm, which there isn't on a kneecap.
I just want to point out, if I'm correct, I think that the science, the grade 11 science kneecap was given at the end of 2 weeks of AP exams.
Correct.
And so many students were coming off of 2, 3, 4 exams, and I don't know whether that had an impact or
and to
not.
tell you the honest truth, I mean, one of the things that's going to be very interesting is the first year of the SBAC, which is a spring test, unlike the kneecap, which is a fall test, will be the last year of the science kneecap test, which will happen in May. So all the testing that year, especially for 8th, 11th, and the 4th graders, will be all at the same time, who are the people who take the science, the math, and but there's a very big window on the SBAC, so you know we'll hopefully be able to work, whereas the kneecaps have been a very small window.
And what year do we switch to the SBAC?
14, 15, in the spring of 15 will be the first test. So the last kneecaps are next year in the fall of 13. There are actually some modifications. There won't be, for example, in the help, there won't be probability on the 4th grade test, which there have been in the past in the kneecap, and our teachers know that, so they know that they don't have to teach that. There's just very small modifications as we move, and then there'll basically be a full year from then until the spring of 15 before there's a test.
Do we know will we be a pilot district?
We haven't been so far. There were pilot districts selected, and we were not one of those districts. We let the state know we were interested. It was a random national sample and I don't know how the matrix, some districts had 3 or 4 schools, some like us, none at all, which surprised me because, you know, often we are considered a pilot district for a variety of reasons because we represent a certain population of the state. There will be some choice pilots that we'll get to do next year. And so the principals have let the agency know the ones that are interested in doing it. So hopefully we'll have that opportunity.
Thanks.
I noticed for the students on assistance in 3rd through 8th grade, we've seemed to be making some pretty good and steady progress in how we're doing. And I have two questions. The first question is, how would you account for why we have seen that progress? What have we been doing right? Because it seems like we're doing some things right, but there's still a ways to go. So the second part of my question is, what are the plans to continue to work on that segment of our student population?
So 2 things about that. The first question in terms of what we've been doing right, and especially I have to give commendations to the Chamberlain School, which and to the middle school, who both have been addressing poverty very strongly over the last few years. And in fact, Chamberlain's, which was identified in math for all students by a few points, was not identified for poverty. One of the few schools with the number of students in poverty that they have, not identified for poverty. And in fact, our poverty scores at Chamberlain are the best, or one of the best in the state. So, and that is because, first under Judy Maynard, I want to give credit, Judy really saw this issue. It's why they built the data walls and really began to look at the kids. Orchard is doing the same. And so really by seeing those kids as individuals and seeing, oh, that kid, and look, those are the kids in poverty. Teachers, it's not like, oh, well, 85% of our kids are making it. So one of it is, I think, really identifying the kids individually and knowing that they're children, you know, and that when you see that visual, it's really helped. And then giving assistance, so a lot of progress monitoring. All of the schools that are in improvement had to write reports for the state, were accepted by the state, and I thought that was really easy because all our reports were accepted, but I found out that Essex High School, for example, has been rejected 3 times with their improvement report to the state. But mostly what we're looking at is progress monitoring, looking at students and making sure that they are making the progress, and if not, what are the kinds of supports that we can put with them to catch them up, not to remediate, not to go slower, but actually to go faster, because they can't fall behind their peers. So we are trying to put those kinds of pieces in place. In order to do that, Chamberlain does have, our schools have reading assistants. Chamberlain has a full-time math person, and if you remember, the district last year gave $20,000 for math assistants, and I actually used our grant for another $20,000 for Orchard because they qualified as a Title I school, so Central $20,000 from the district, and we hired a .4 math coach in each of those buildings to try to help push that forward. So that's kind of stuff we're doing.
I mean, I do think that the practices at Chamberlain have also helped inform practices here, you know, at the other schools. And
That's
so,
true.
I would say that it's not all about it's
No.
others. There's definitely, you know, and Stuart's been working with all three elementary schools through administrative regular meetings and looking at the data, looking at the service, and action plans associated.
And again, at the building principals, you know, much more than me, you know, really do the work here. And again, the middle school too, which was identified for poverty 2 years ago when we had our first quote check mark, when the standards went up for poverty in reading and math. And when they were actually identified, they were not identified for reading anymore in poverty. They had brought that score up, you know, within a year. We'll see how it, I think we'll see the same this year, and had actually made gains in poverty and math, just not enough not to get the second check mark, you know, which is one of those things that's frustrating where you've really made some gains, but it's the same as if you hadn't in terms of, you know, the practicality of it. But they did that by teachers really looking in, at issues pertaining to poverty and doing some reading and some talking and some studying, so they really could understand why it is that, you know, students, and we're going to continue one of the pieces, the other piece, Martin, you know, besides having the plans with the state that they've approved. Part of it is that now 10% of our Title I money has to go to professional development around school improvement, which for the most part is math. And so we're working with some math consultants with all our teachers at the elementary a fair amount of time, and some at the high and the middle.
Stuart, I know this question's come up before, but is it accurate that Algebra 2 is not required for graduation?
That is accurate.
And there's some mixed data in here. The questions say that 92% of our graduates have completed at least Algebra 2, and I'm looking at this math requirements report that says this year 62.6% of seniors completed Algebra 2.
Well, but that's only not counting the ones who completed calculus. In other words, they've completed Algebra 2 or more. In other words, if you look at 39.2% had completed pre-calculus, those students have completed Algebra 2 already.
But wouldn't we say that, though? This is, I don't understand the difference. 92% of our graduates have completed at least Algebra 2.
Right.
And 62.6% of seniors completed Algebra 2.
69.8 will have completed Algebra 2, and then you had to have to add the 39.2 who've done pre-cal, and then the kids who have done calculus, because that combined number is that 92% of Algebra 2 or better.
Okay, that's a little awkward to read, but if I go back to, if the governor is calling for increased math requirements,
right,
including geometry and Algebra 2, Why are we not looking at that when we have 92% completing at least Algebra 2?
The main reason at this point, Elizabeth, and that's why on the first page, I talk about the new proficiency requirements. We're trying not to add Carnegie credits for a system that's going down. You know, in other words, if we said, okay, everybody's got to have a Carnegie credit of Algebra 2 to graduate, we're waiting this summer. I think the board, you know, of ed will, or whatever they are now, will, you know, say to the agency, this is the new requirement of proficiency, that students will need to be proficient in Algebra 2, which will be the same piece, and then that's what we'll all be doing. And then we'll have 8% of our kids that we'll have to figure out how to make them proficient in Algebra 2, because we're not reaching that goal yet with them.
So without requiring it, we're already at 92%.
That's right.
What you're saying, okay.
Right. And with all the kids, you have to take 3 years of credit of math, so with all kids getting through Algebra 1, as 9th graders for the first time this year, it should also increase kids getting through Algebra 2.
Okay.
And just to be clear, it doesn't count if they had Algebra 1 in 8th grade.
Not as a credit.
They have to have it in 3
Right.
years in high school.
That's right. If you start in geometry or more as a freshman,
Yep.
you still need 3
years.
3 years of math credit.
Other questions?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
I think we covered both of the items under item 10, that is changes in math as well as the
Yes.
NCAP results, yes? Okay. And that takes us to item 11 on our agenda, which is the executive limitations report, policy monitoring report on asset protection. Item 2.7, we've had it in our possession, had a chance to look through it. The changes, I understand, are highlighted in yellow from the previous report. Are there members of the board who have questions or comments on the report?
I do, as we walk through these, I think.
Well, that's really, I guess, the first question is, do we want to walk through from top to bottom or just address questions generally?
Well, I think we should probably walk through top to bottom
Okay.
and ask on each detailed policy whether there's a question.
All right, so why don't we turn then to, I guess it's really the second page where we go to detail policy number 1. Comments or questions about that?
The one question I had was actually related to the Exhibit 2A that's referenced about insurance for school-to-works programs. And it's just I was just wondering, I mean, the medical coverage, $25,000, is that sufficient? I mean, I don't really know if $25,000 is appropriate or not as far as coverage. Is that what we would expect? Should it be more? Do we have exposure there?
Visbit saw that there was a gap in coverages for interns, i.e. big picture specifically, working at off campus. And not only for our kids who were covered under the liability, but for the business themselves who could be harmed in the event that an occurrence happened while the student was at their place of business. So their opinion is that this is a good amount for that, that coverage.
Well, that's fine.
Yep.
I just saw the
question.
figure without understanding whether, otherwise I was fine with detail policy number 1.
Okay. If we look at detail policy number 2, there is no change. Takes us to detail policy number 3. Any comments or questions about that?
I had a couple just editing comments
No
on
problem.
that one.
Thank you.
First, at the phrase, this is at the end, that I assure the board that facilities are used in ways that are usual and customary for schools. I think that's kind of your concluding remark. It doesn't, it should just move to the end of that.
Sure.
And then you have a that should be that. Something the no one in the district. I would change something that no one in the district. Not major, but we should but we should have
Gotcha.
it, yeah.
Yep, thank you.
I assume that typos can be corrected as well.
I think that's
I don't have a whole lot of them.
reasonable.
But otherwise, I was fine with that.
Takes us, if there are no other comments, to detail policy number 4. I didn't really get whether the yellow
No, that was,
minute
that-
was
that's
intentional.
not, nope.
Okay, there's not a
Just-
change.
We didn't remove.
Okay.
Number 4 is also just a kind of fairly minor in the human resources, where you have there. I think you should strike proposed FY 2014, because it is now the budget, and then add the word budget. It should be in the FY 2014 budget.
Gotcha.
Otherwise, I was fine with that as well.
Detail policy number 5.
And here as well, I have something, and this is more of a little confusion on the language that was used. And this is in the evidence, number 5, actually. Maybe last time we looked at this, I understood what you meant, but I wanted to make sure I understood this time. Where it says, when only one bid is received meeting our specifications, an explanation of reasons why is included. I think that could be just tightened a little bit, because maybe I was tired and hadn't had my nap yet, but at the time I wasn't sure the reasons why, what that meant. But what I thought it meant, and I just want to make sure that this is what it meant, is that the district will explain why the district should proceed with the single bidder. I mean, or is that implicit in that language, and I was just being confused?
It's more clear the way you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you that
Yeah, I think it's
language,
good.
but it just.
Yeah, because we at times, as you know, have come to those where singulars are only.
Sure.
But we we generally have given a response to the reasons why there's only one. So I think we could be clear with that.
Yeah, I just wanted, just clarity of language on that.
Sure.
And otherwise, I was fine with that as well.
There is an alternate interpretation, and it could have been what was meant, which is what I thought it meant, which is that an explanation of why we only got one bid would be given.
Right, well, see, there we go, there was
So
ambiguity.
So I'm
after
not
all.
really,
So you should clarify whatever that why is, whether it's the why is I understood, or the why is Rich understood.
yeah.
I kind of understood the way you
Yeah,
said it.
now it
Rich.
makes me read it.
Fine. Yeah.
We can clean that up. It's good.
All right, well, there we go, uncovered ambiguity.
That takes us, unless there's something more on 5, to detail policy number 6.
And again, I have another a comment. This is more of a question. Perhaps it's a little bit broader, and I think that this is something that has come up before, and that is whether the district has a data retention plan. And I was looking specifically in the discussion about emails with respect to this, but it could go broader than that. I do believe that we talked about a data retention plan at one point on whether the district has one, and if not, whether it should. And that is in the context of, if at some point we have to produce documents in some sort of litigation, that if we've gotten rid of the documents or emails under a data retention plan, we should be fine. But if you don't have one, you could get into some trouble in that kind of scenario. And there may be other scenarios. I haven't done this electronic discovery for 6 years, so Rich might.
Well, most organizations seem to have the following data retention plan. We don't throw anything away ever,
Well,
unless we
that's-
can't find it anymore. And that's not a very good answer if you
Well-
get into litigation and the question is, did there come a point,
But I mean, the other
At
question
some point,
is,
do we
are you
dump this
keeping
stuff?
emails forever? Then it should be a conscious decision that, we are keeping emails forever.
Yeah.
But if at some point we're saying, well, there's just too much, instead of having some arbitrary, we're gonna get rid of this
We have
material.
a plan that specifies
should-
how
yeah,
long we keep.
that you're doing it up front according to a plan.
So it says that we currently have archived email data from March 2009. Are you saying, Martin, that we should say we
According
keep
to-
email, according
I think
to
he's
our
wanting to say more
3-year
about
policy?
according to a
or-
plan.
Well, I mean, you could have, it could be much more specific than that, or it could presumably be that we are, are you keeping it from that date forward forever? Or are you gonna have 5 years worth of
Right.
emails?
Well, that's what we're currently doing, I think, and we indicate that we add additional storage as needed to kind of comply with that. That may not be satisfactory
Storage is cheap, I guess.
to, you know, the desired plan that the board requests around data. You know, data.
I don't think it's such an
storage.
easy question to answer, if you start thinking about how long is long enough, particularly when you have, when your clients are kids. So if the statute of limitations is probably as long as 7 years from the oldest age at which somebody graduates, or maybe worse.
Well, I mean, there are requirements on educational records. You
Yeah.
know, there are obviously regulations on employee records, and those are more in the hard copy, although we're working to transition to, you know, those becoming more electronic too.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at,
Yeah,
I looked
I
at
think
the
it's-
context of emails because I figured that those would be outside of that window of something that had regulations. And maybe it's just fine to be storing it, and sometime down the road, we'll have to make a decision on whether
What
to
I-
keep buying storage, but.
Yeah, I mean, what I might recommend is that, a recommendation here would be that, so noted, but we do have some things happening in the near future with Human Resource Direct, you know, that I think is going to help us provide some additional guidance, clarity around education records, data storage, you know, would be my hope is to, when we revisit this, we ought to put a tickle on this to say, what is our plan, and inform you of that.
I think that's right. I think the right answer to this is that before this policy comes up to be monitored again, the administration ought to think about what is an appropriate data retention plan, and address it. And I think it's adequate for today.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
I agree.
Take us to detail policy number 7.
I had a question on the last sentence on this one. It says that the management letters listed several items for action, some of which will require long-term action to correct, such as pension and nutrition services funding. What that didn't specifically say is whether any of these items that were listed in the management letters means that controls are insufficient. Now, I kind of understood from the audit itself that that's the case, but I think that should be made explicit here, that these do not rise to the level that, you know, showing that the controls are insufficient. If that's the case, but that was how I understood the audit.
That's correct. The audit, I think, it does affirm that.
Just an appropriate moment to fill the board in on our conversation with the auditor about.
Yeah, we do have that coming up, Rich, in the next, but that may be part of the, you know, under asset
The audit
protection.
report. Yeah, we can take it on the audit.
But I think, so noted, good spot to.
That's really right.
Yep.
And let's see.
So can we just, can you say that one more time, the kind of the?
Well, I think you just have to make, let's see, I didn't suggest any language, it's,
Okay.
I just would like to see that last sentence there.
Identifies that there's no.
Well, that doesn't, I mean, it kind of
wrongdoing.
raised the question to me whether, well, that, the
The
management.
auditor is not saying we're out of compliance with GAAP.
Yeah,
Well, no, it's, right, and I think, let's see.
long-term action to correct such pension. So these identified items, we can put something in here that brings us back to that there's.
That this does not mean, I mean, it's mainly that the management letters, those several items, that none of those indicated that controls were insufficient.
You might add, rather, they are recommendations for strengthening internal controls.
Right. Yeah, it just kind of raised the flag to me. If I
Yeah.
hadn't read the audit report,
Yeah.
I would say, well,
good.
well, it kind of left me hanging.
Yep, it's helpful. We can make that change or addition.
Okay. Detail policy 8. There are no changes. Detail policy 9. No comments. Detail policy 10.
I did have a couple comments on this one. In the evidence, there are some items that we've had on here for a while. And it's not like one-time kind of things. Well, for instance, under high-quality education program, it says, the third bullet point, the district website is increasingly being used to provide more information to the community on the educational program and the operation of the district. Teachers and staff have been receiving ongoing training on the use of this communication software. Is that still true? Does that need an update? Maybe that one doesn't need an update as much as a couple of the other ones, such as the fifth one, a district-wide data team has been developed to put the systems in place to capture data that relates to student progress on ends. I mean, what is the status of that? Because I mean, that seems to be like this ongoing thing. And there was one other one that jumped out at me, and that's in the sound resource management, the last bullet point. We are evaluating resource management measures to find those that will contribute to the understanding of district effectiveness. What's the update? What's the status of that effort? I think the others were kind of this one-time thing.
No, I think it's good
ongoing.
what Martin brings up. You know, when we talk about School Fusion, which is our main interface district website, I mean, as you probably have heard, we've made some transitions to EDU in the district, and so that there is more relevant interfaces that are currently happening, are more up to date. So we can refresh this a little bit more.
Yeah, it's just, you know, because we don't see this but every once a year or so. And but the bigger issue I had with this one actually is with respect to the staff conduct. And it says during this reporting period, several employees have faced discipline that was a result of conduct that was illegal, unethical, or not prudent. That would seem to suggest to me that we're not in compliance with detailed policy number 10, because we're supposed to demonstrate that the staff conduct is legal, ethical, and prudent. That may not be the case, but I think that that needs to be answered, that these several incidents don't rise to the level of disparaging the district, or it begs for further explanation. We say, oh yeah, we have several employees who've been doing these things. Well, should we be concerned?
Yeah, what's the impact?
Yeah, again, the point was being informative about individuals that have faced disciplinary actions.
Sure.
But I agree, does not rise to the level of putting the district in, circumstances that are, whatever, I don't know how the right word there, but.
I also feel like you have to put a number in here, not necessarily employees, but maybe incidents that you've characterized in this way.
Instead of just saying several.
Yeah, I feel like that's subject to some broad interpretation.
Yeah, the only thing I say with that is sometimes, although if it's a singular, it can tease something out if it's known, and it calls it out. Again, if it's illegal, it would be public, and so.
Right, if it's personnel stuff, you have to be sensitive, but still.
It's not like we're naming it, so I'm not trying to be defensive to that. I just, that was kind of the lens initially, but I think we can attach a number.
And just give further explanation of why this does not mean there's a non-compliance with this policy.
Because as you read it, it looks pretty alarming, but we don't know what level of impact it has.
Well, presumably we do know, but.
Well, we don't know. I mean,
well, we know
this.
of certain instances in which
discipline
discipline has been reported to us.
But what I'm saying, when I read this, I don't.
Right, you don't know whether or
That's
not
right.
that is one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think might be one comment that might be appropriate, assuming it's true, is that each of these instances were reported to the board in executive session, the board's aware of them and satisfied with the administration's response or something like that.
Sure.
Because I think that's in fact the case, is each of the ones I can think of.
Yeah.
Right, and I think.
Assuming I know of them all, or
Right,
just
right.
not.
And I'm thinking that, I mean, if there's discipline, that could be the answer to this particular situation, whatever it was, is being dealt with so that does not endanger the organization. If an individual does something bad and gets away with it, that's one thing, but if in fact it's been proper discipline, that supposedly is protecting this particular policy.
It's good, I'll add some detail to that. All right. 11, we satisfied with 11?
I had a question. It might not be considered, I don't know if it falls into any one of these, but when was the Donna Spooner thing done?
That was reported in.
Yeah, I think it was
prior
reported.
report.
Yeah, I think we've seen
It was, okay.
Yeah.
It just, I lost track of time then.
The courtyard,
Courtyard.
yeah,
Yes.
more than a year.
Is it really? Wow.
Yep.
Couple of years.
Okay, caught me too, saying that was. All right,
So we're not ready for action on this one tonight. We have
Bring it back.
some
with
refinements to
corrections.
the be made. Correct? That's correct. That
you.
takes us to the audit report.
And so, I don't want to claim that you've had the opportunity to read it completely, but there's a lot in there. I think that it's also fair to say that you know that Rich and John and I met yesterday actually and had a conversation specific to the nutrition service deficit situation. It's likely that that might be a conversation that you might want to talk a little bit about. But why don't I allow John to just maybe provide a quick overview, John, of maybe the management letter and then allow the board to ask questions specific to things that you saw.
Sure. First of all, we'll run through the report pretty quickly. I highlighted 7 areas. Last year I tried to do 15 and I wanted to keep it concise, but, and page 1 is the audit opinion, which is clean, or it's an unqualified opinion, which means that they assert that our financial statements reflect what really is going on. Pages 3 to 10 are the management discussion and analysis, and most of that is information that is required to be in summary form that the administration needs to put in the audit report. But if you go to page 10, there are 4 things that I want to make sure that you see, and that's two parts of this are currently known facts, decisions, or conditions, and then economic factors that we talked about in this report. The first one was the decrease in federal funds, and we've talked about that quite extensively in the audit process, so that it doesn't need to be, it was pointed out here as a problem for us in this current budget year. The second issue is the outstanding issue with the city, where we had an agreement back to 2001 that we looked at in 2012 with a view towards settling in 2013. And there's still an outstanding issue there of $70,000 with the mechanic services. And we thought that was important to include in this management letter.
John, the only confusing thing on that is it says for services received by the school district.
Well, the disagreement is how much and what was received.
Well,
I think the disagreement is our position is no services were received.
yeah, that they weren't received. It says how much would be paid to the city for mechanic services received by the school district. That's misleading to me.
Although maybe it's accurate if you think about it as applying to more than 1 year.
In that year.
In that year, there were no services received.
And the issue was that the city had proposed a fee for services. And that was the core of the disagreement, and then there was a bill for $70,000. There weren't any services received.
Yeah, the sentence is problematical unless you understand it to apply to more than 1 year.
You know, it was specific to 12 is how I was writing it. So,
Yeah.
So it should say for mechanical services that were not received.
Sure, okay.
But it's not really our sentence anymore, is it?
No,
It's the auditor's sentence now.
Correct.
We're sort of stuck with it, I think.
Well,
But you can ask for we can ask for,
Clarification,
yeah,
then we should.
to page 10,
Yeah.
specific
Then we
to,
should.
I think this wouldn't be a
no,
hard change to make, they just
Yeah.
change the
and
one
an important
page.
one, given,
Yeah.
okay.
And then the other two factors are the Affordable Care Act and the Vermont Insurance Exchange, et cetera, which is affecting us in ways we don't know yet, and our rate increase, of course, did. In state legislation regarding school choice. Those are some pretty big issues that needed to be talked about. On page 15 is the balance sheet for the general fund. We're called our governmental funds. And just to show what the fund balances were, the general fund toward the bottom is $1,821,000. The capital project fund is the money we have set aside to pay debt service on loan, on the note that we took in 2006. And then there's other governmental funds, which are special revenue funds, grants, et cetera, that have a balance of $296,000. The next page, and this is probably where we'll discuss a little bit more in depth, is on page 19, which shows our enterprise funds, our proprietary funds, where our total net assets for the school nutrition program are a negative $278,779, with an unrestricted deficit of $347,000. Positive schools out program of $138,000, and then a couple other minor funds here. And this is where Rich and David both, we met with our auditor yesterday to discuss this issue about the nutritional services and how to handle that.
And I guess I should report to the board on the conversation, although I have to say that this may be a situation in which it's just beyond my expertise, and I just don't understand what the auditor is saying. But it's the same confusion I've had from the very beginning, which is that it doesn't seem as though the audit report accurately reflects the fact that this deficit has been paid. I mean, in fact, we don't, the Nutritional Services Fund owes the district $347,803, but the district doesn't owe that money to anybody else. That money has come from current operating funds as the years have passed and has been paid. And I said to the auditor, as I've said to this board several times, it doesn't make any sense to me to continue to carry this debt on our books that it seems very unlikely the nutritional services can ever pay back. The conclusion I reached from talking with the auditor is that, and John, I want you to correct me when you, or disagree with me when you disagree with me.
Okay.
Maybe it won't be a matter of correcting me, or maybe it will, because I may be wrong. It seems to me as though what should have happened in the past is that if, for example, the nutritional services fund ran a $100,000 deficit in a given year, that at the end of that year, the books should have been zeroed out, because we paid the deficit out of the general fund, the money's gone, and so the fund lost $100,000, but the school district is not in the hole. The consequence of not having done that is that if we were to write off the $347,000 from the auditor's perspective, we would have to raise an additional $347,000 in the year we do that in order for the income side of our books to match the balance sheet side. And that doesn't seem like a very satisfactory resolution to me, because if we did that, we would then have $347,000 for which we had no matching expenses. We'd have free cash, which isn't really our business. We're not in business to make money. And the auditor and I just don't seem to be able to reconcile this problem. Nor can John and I reconcile this problem. John, do you want to explain how you see it?
I will.
Yeah.
The nutritional services has set up as a fund to run separately, being self-supporting. And this gives us a measure of how well we did. And it's not self-supporting. So in order to pay those bills, money had to come from the general fund, cash to pay the bills. The general fund has an asset on its books of, has more than just the nutritional services part, but it has an asset on its books of $347,000 attributable to the nutritional services fund. If we were to forgive this debt of nutritional services, we would write off that asset, the receivable, and have a bad debt expense or a transfer to nutritional service, which would lower our fund balance. Our cash would be made whole in the general fund only if we got the revenue from another means,
Which we
i.e.
did.
in our budget.
Yeah, but which we did as we went along. If you think about this from a year-to-year perspective, I mean, in the year that we ran a $100,000 deficit in the nutritional services fund, we didn't spend $100,000 of other money that we budgeted to spend, and we then spent it on nutritional services, or else we would have come out behind.
But I mean, I think what is important is if you highlighted it to the dollar, in other words, everything we budgeted as out of the general fund, we needed to use. And we came to the end of the year and there was no more money carry forward, no fund balance. But yet on the books, the nutritional service was a deficit. We'd have no way to reconcile that. So what we're being informed is we got to carry that forward as a deficit, and we've got to figure out how to pay that off. So Rich highlights the fact that there's money there, it got paid off, that's in zeroed out, but that's not what, again, the presentation of information has been provided.
Let me just see if I can understand this. So when we have a carryover, that $100,000 deficit that we have in the nutritional services, we get to the end of the year and the books are all done, even though we've paid those bills, we paid whoever we needed to pay that $100,000. But is that $100,000 still carried over as if it's still there for the next year's budget?
It is, because on the balance sheet of the general fund, the cash is, the $100,000 is gone, but there's a replacement asset or accounts receivable due from other funds.
So the point is, I guess, for the next year's budget, we actually have that $100,000 when we really don't.
Well, it's, from my perspective, you know, it's very confusing what we're doing, because we're showing a $347,000 debt on the part of nutritional services, and we are also showing a corresponding asset on the part of the school district of $347,000.
Receivable, right.
Now, the reality is that unless we find the magic key to nutritional services is never going to pay us back $347,000.
Right, so that seems to be a false $347,000
That's right. I mean,
that we're carrying forward.
When you say, when these books say we have a $347,000 asset, and that asset is a claim against our nutritional services fund, I think that's a misleading way to look at this situation. If it were a different situation, if we had a $300 deficit in nutritional services because somebody didn't put the last check in before the end of the year, and next year we're going to get it, it would be more realistic to say, yeah, you got a $300 debt, and you got a $300 claim, and next year it's all going to balance out. But when you get this far behind, it's never going to balance out.
But that's also where it kind of makes sense that we would have to ask for that $347,000. That's the part I was trying to work out in my head, that in fact, if we want to erase those and make it truer, we actually do have to include that in the budget.
Right, I mean, part of it is the charge to say, how do you superintendent and staff get us in a place where you're gonna do that,
Yeah.
And part of that may be, you know, we have a plan over X number of years to get us there, plus money that we need to take out of the general fund to pay off, you know, to pay that off, so.
So that's exactly
what
the
you
nub
got-
of what I don't
you don't like.
understand.
Yeah.
Because if we hadn't paid the $347,000, let us suppose that our vendors allowed the nutritional services fund to owe them $347,000, then we'd have to go out and find $347,000 next year to pay that back somehow. Okay? But the fact is, we paid it. It's gone. And if we find the $347,000 to pay it back, we don't have a corresponding expense to match it against.
We've already paid it.
It's already been paid.
But what John says makes sense to me.
Yeah.
It's really gonna be a case of bad debt.
Yeah.
And not that we'd have to raise it, we just write it off. But I also, you know, I mean, I think we need to be, I don't see this fundamentally as different from the issue that happened with the foundation, when the foundation committed to funding for the bleachers, I think, right? And I don't know that that's even been reconciled either, but we basically had to front them the money until they could raise it to pay us back. So in essence, we were fronting nutritional services, but, you know, I think the real issue in here is the level at which that deficit has been allowed to grow.
Well, I think it's very useful that it's here in terms of saying to the board, there's a problem that needs to be solved. So the fact that we're looking at this number is a good thing in that sense. But it doesn't make sense to me to say, in terms of adding up our assets and our liabilities, that we have a $347,000 asset, which is.
Well, if you
the
loan
fund
somebody
is
the
gonna
money,
pay us
if
back
you
the
loan
money.
somebody the
Exactly.
money, you would have it as an asset up until the point you said,
I'm gonna,
I'm writing it off
Forgive
as
it.
bad debt.
And the problem I have with the present situation, the auditor says to me, there are 3 things you can do to get rid of this. One, you can get nutritional services to pay it back. That's not gonna happen, I don't think, as a practical matter. I mean, we're having a very hard time trying to keep it running at no profit. For it to run at $347,000 in profit, as I said, we'd have to find the magic key to restaurant services here or something. That's not gonna happen, I don't think. 2, we could write it all off in 1 year, or 3, we can write it off in installments. But he says, if you write it off, then you need to raise the $347,000 next year in your budget. And that's what I don't get.
Well, that's because it's
Is
three hundred
that
forty-seven
how you
thousand that we're
understand
not
it?
carrying over, because
Yes,
it's now
and-
bad debt, it's no longer an asset, so I guess I can kind of understand, I think I understand it.
If you subtract the numbers from both sides, and you look at your net balance of assets, they don't change.
But if you loan an
It's the same.
entity, if you loan an entity money
Yeah,
and somebody doesn't pay you back,
yeah.
it's not like you've got to go out and borrow the money yourself or replenish the money that you loaned. You write it off. The
Yeah.
asset is the paper you have, and
You're saying what I'm saying.
yeah.
Well, but let me
But
ask
he's
you-
saying something different. He's saying, no,
Oh, I hear
if you
that.
write that $347,000 off,
Yeah.
in order for you not to run a deficit next year, you've got to tax the taxpayers $347,000.
That makes no sense.
That doesn't make sense to me. And I said to him, the end of our conversation was, this reminds me of my own relationship with some of my clients as a lawyer, where clients say to me, don't tell me I can't do this. Tell me how I can do what I want to do. Because I don't want to be carrying this false expectation that nutritional service is going to pay us $350,000 and around when we really don't expect that. And I don't know that he's going to come back with that. But
So when we are doing the budget every year and we're using that to go to the state to get our money and such, is part of that budget both the deficit and the asset? Or is it just the asset part of that kind of goes through in this whole budgeting
well, the balance
process?
sheet isn't really part of the budget, is it?
No, it's revenue and expenses. in the current year for the general fund,
Yeah.
plus anything
That's all.
transfers in or out that we include in the budget.
I mean, the
For
budget,
instance, when we got the preliminary audit report last year, David and I got together and said, we believe that this is an ongoing problem. We recommended that there be $125,000 from every budget be put into the nutritional services
going forward.
To take care of this, and then with the expectation of getting the current situation under control in nutritional services. When we put the preliminary budget in, that $125,000 was there, and that was the purpose of the $125,000.
Well, I understand that
We
part.
needed and that's taxation to, it's
Pay off the
new
bad
money
debt.
from the taxpayers to raise this debt.
That's when it seems like we're speaking different languages, because from my perspective, functionally, the budget answers this question. How much are you gonna spend next year, and where are you gonna get it from? The balance sheet answers a different question. What is the district worth? What does it own, and what does it owe? And I don't see why acknowledging the fact that there is no separate entity that owes us $347,000, and therefore we don't owe $347,000, and we're not gonna get $347,000, I don't see how that affects how much income we need to raise in order to spend all the money we need to spend in order to run our program next year.
Yeah, if it is
That
just
makes
revenue,
sense.
yeah, now it's making sense to me. If it's just revenue and expenses that are going into the budgeting process.
Well, how would we handle, John, a situation where we billed somebody for a service? Say we had a tuition student or something and another
Right.
district
Yeah.
refused to pay us. Would we have to go raise taxes with our own community to offset that debt?
No, you would just offset it as, either write down the revenue that as a bad debt, or call it an expense. But that's all in the general fund. See,
That's
those
general fund
expenses would
expense.
be
But
only
actually,
in the
you
general
would
fund.
have to do that, John. If you had,
Well, if you recorded the revenue, you would.
if we expected to receive in the next year $300,000 from choice students.
Right.
And we didn't, all right? And we didn't cut our expenses, we'd have to raise $300,000 someplace.
Right, but if you had students here that you were billing and you expected, because they had received the service and then
And they didn't
they
pay,
didn't pay after a
and they
number
weren't
of
gonna pay,
periods,
you know?
and then if we decided, well, it's time to write this down because they're never gonna pay, they don't have the money or whatever, then that would be reduction in revenue, which would affect the bottom line.
Yeah. And the difference from my perspective is, this isn't a separate entity. There is no other entity. It's just a different line of numbers that all adds up to our total numbers.
So can we just fold the enterprise fund and say, we're gonna put this debt into the, and take, I mean, could you just if you got rid of the enterprise fund, would the problem go away?
That's a question I asked the
Well, if
auditor.
you folded it all into the general fund,
Then it still
you
has
take it
that.
as it is, and there would be a $378 or $347,000 hit to the general fund.
We'd be worth $347,000 less than it looks like we're worth now,
Exactly,
which is true.
that's right, and then
In
our
order to get that.
budget as a whole, because we didn't budget for that amount of money.
No, we're not,
Can
we
we
don't
off-
need $347,000 more dollars to spend, John.
Can we offset it with the Schools Out program?
Well, David and I have discussed that. The Schools
That was
Out
a bad
program,
question.
No, she
the
was.
School Out program has righted the ship this year, and it's gonna be in the black again, so. But
But it
those are
raises,
fees that are collected for a certain purpose, for a certain service. It's different than nutritional services.
but it raises exactly the opposite question, all right? Which is, next year, that account has $150,000 more dollars than it needs to spend to operate itself.
Right,
That money belongs to this district.
it does, yep.
It doesn't belong to some other entity. It's ours. Ours being the larger ours now.
Yeah.
It's the district's money.
Right, the challenge there is that, it was received for a specific service and offering. And so either it is the district's, but again, this is where John, the challenge in the discussion is, then we ought to be lowering the rates, because but we have the ability to have it to be a very prosperous business partner, you know, if we have people who want the service, I mean, and it makes a revenue, or it makes money, that's fine. But, so that's where I pose the question. I mean, if we had this unbelievable situation, like everything, it just kept making more and more money, you know, what would we do? And the idea was we use that to help pay off the, you know, the other enterprise deficit.
But I think it would be more reasonable, given that we're trying to provide a service, for us to reduce our rates and not let that happen.
That's correct, but you have revenue. I mean, the problem is, you know, what do you need in there for contingency? You want to be able to run a program, you know, you gotta have reasonable numbers. I don't
It's good to
wanna
have some
claim to
money.
zero it either.
It's
you
good
know.
to have some money in case you need it. So I don't know the answer.
Can you combine enterprise funds? Can you consolidate and call it the, like, division of
Well, I mean, we really do have a
augmentative
consolidated
services
balance
and
sheet.
it's schools
Page-
out and
Yeah,
nutrition?
page 14
Yeah.
does really consolidate these numbers.
What's that? I'm sorry.
Page 14 really does
Okay.
consolidate these
He's
numbers.
not gonna go for that.
Is it 14?
They have to be both.
That's the one I tore out.
15.
15.
So you did put it back in?
I tore it up, I put it back.
Well,
He wasn't mad, he just took it out.
I took it out
Analyze.
just to be able to line them
Yeah.
up, you know.
yeah, between 15 and 19, that's essentially the whole fund balance, all the funds, except student activities, but they're, and pensions not in there. But that's kind of a look at where our operating budgets are.
But I mean, I think it also, if you look at the total line, you know, the fact that that this fund owes $347,000 and then it owes it to us, doesn't change the numbers in the total. Right, John?
Right, I mean, yes, there's,
Cause it's got a balance.
They balance one another. It doesn't change those numbers at all. It doesn't mean anything.
So are we acting on something tonight, or?
Can you tell that we had
I
a very
wouldn't know what
productive,
to
which we
act on.
did, a very productive and informed meeting without any distinctive conclusion? I think is the
Well,
issue.
I mean, the idea of having an audit is that the audit confirms that our books accurately reflect our financial situation. And I'm overall satisfied that they do. But I think in this respect, they are not as, they are less transparent than they should be.
we had a.
That's my conclusion.
We had to ask 2 years ago to research how to make these transfers. I don't have the authority, David, and I don't think the board has the authority to transfer funds without going through the budget process. But I can pull that information back up to be able to make these transfers. That's why,
Through the
if
budget
it's an enterprise
process.
fund, I would never make a transfer to, but then that would alter the intent of how we run it. It's supposed to
How
be
we
self-sufficient.
report it as
Yes.
the
Yeah.
individual entities of the program.
Well, I'm mystified still.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, the fundamental question that you said is what you had said is, how can we do this?
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, we can continue, I mean, you and I and John spent the time together. We can ask that again, you know, how can we do this? It just still doesn't make sense, and see where we go.
I mean, the conclusion that if we did it, we would then end up having to increase our budget by $350,000. And we would get the money and we wouldn't have an expense to spend it against. Just doesn't make sense to me. And that would be bad liability, a bad asset. It would be the opposite of bad debt. It would be, here you have an asset that you don't have a place to put. I don't know.
Well, I know, I mean, I don't, I mean, John, clearly, you know, this puts us in an awkward place around, I mean, how to move forward. I don't want to, we can go back to Ron or someone else and say,
how do we do this? And maybe
Well,
we
I wouldn't
want,
recommend we do anything different with this audit report.
No, I'm not suggesting.
I'm not
so.
suggesting that either. But I'm just saying on what do we do? I guess that's a,
Kind of
you know.
moving forward.
Right.
Well,
how-
I guess.
or what are the
I guess-
options? How can I do this?
I guess one thing we could do, and it's not an option that Ron mentioned, is we could continue to carry and allow the nutritional fund deficit to build.
Not build, maybe stay the same,
Well,
stay there.
you know, or, all right, if
Well,
we run the program the way we want to, and it doesn't generate any additional losses,
Yeah,
then we would continue to carry forward this forever. That doesn't make much sense to me, but we could do that.
I just continue to show this as on the books as a,
You know, we're still waiting for the day those people over in nutritional services send us that check.
in 10 years.
Well, I assume the question was asked, dissolving the enterprise funds, what impact does that have?
Still gonna show the debt, right? I mean, that's what's
Well,
been,
it would show 137,000.
No, if we dissolve the
today.
enterprise fund,
Mhm.
and we then did not
Well,
carry that
maybe
line.
consolidate.
Yeah, consolidate.
Yeah.
If we consolidate.
Oh, I see.
It would flow into the total, and that would solve the problem, I think. Although Ron tells me, that in that event, that we would show, in the year we did that, a $350,000 deficit.
From nutritional services, and then he didn't go through schools out in Munson Field, et cetera. We consolidated them all. Schools out would add 138,000 as a positive.
Yeah.
Yes. It's not, it's not proper gap. He seemed to think it was something we could do. So I'll probably work with him a little bit more.
Yeah.
but as far as the audit report and what it is what it is, and but what I'm hearing is questions are still there around how to deal with this. And so we can explore, as John just said, some options for the board to consider.
I mean, if we were at the point where our independent funds were at or near zero in balance, and we were looking at how to go forward, I would suggest that the right thing to do would be, at the end of each year, to acknowledge where we are and to write it down to zero, so that if there's a $150,000 surplus in the after schools out program, that's money that's available for us to use in the next year. If there's not, if there's a $300,000 or $100,000 loss in nutritional services, you know, that's money we spent this year on nutritional services, and it's gone. And to show that year in and year out. And that would achieve the purpose, as I understand it, running these enterprise funds, of isolating these costs and expenses and having the board understand whether we are subsidizing or being subsidized by the programs. But since we're so far from it, I don't even see how we can do that right now. Because we'd have this negative consequence if that's really true. I don't know, should we get another opinion from go to an an accounting teacher who teaches auditing and say, what's the right solution here?
Certainly, always go out and get another opinion. I mean, that's
what this is.
Again,
I mean,
the audit report is what it is.
all the audit report is the auditor's opinion that our books are accurate, really. If the auditor can't give us a solution to the problem, I think we should ask somebody else.
Until we find the solution we like.
Well, I mean, maybe the answer is that, you know, auditors know more about auditing than lawyers, in which case we just have to accept that, right? And if that's the reality, I'm willing to accept that. I don't purport to be an expert in this area. I just,
Well,
usually my head is able to follow through and understand what someone's advice is.
everything that's reported follows generally accepted accounting principles, and the notes of the financial statements, note 1 talks about our significant accounting policies. And our accounting policies indicate that proprietary funds, enterprise funds are used for a purpose, fees for services, and they record expenses against those. So we'd have to change all that. We'd have to change a lot of things, and I don't think we'd be in compliance with GAAP. It's just my thinking. If we got rid of enterprise funds and proprietary funds and put everything in the general fund.
But consolidating enterprise funds might be an option.
There's minor funds and major funds that are set up in there, and so we show everything because we're little. We might be able to consolidate schools out in nutritional services, but at this point, I wouldn't say that that's assured.
And I don't think it would be useful to do that, really.
Well, it wouldn't change the reporting out, because I think we still want to see
Yeah, we want
the
to know.
standalone, but it would give us some opportunity to cushion the blow of.
I mean, if it's right that writing this off would require that we raise additional revenue, it would cut in half the additional revenue we have to raise, almost. That would help.
Yes, and the
Just-
total's right there as far as,
Just out of curiosity, I mean, if we had, what did we raise for revenue this year? Was it 800,000, 600?
for nutritional services?
No, for the budget that just passed.
Oh, local funds were $8 million and the rest 34 million was taxes.
But what was incremental to prior year?
Oh, 800,000.
800,000, yeah. So if we said we had to raise 800,000 and we earmarked 350,000 of it for this nutritional fund, then we would have 350,000 in the coffers.
We would, but then
But it would be.
We'd have to cut $350,000 worth of programs to do
But
that.
couldn't we refund it with the surplus we now have? Because that money would be sitting there, available.
That's my point about this being
Well, it makes no sense.
a silly conversation, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about how much money you get in your pockets, we got the same amount of money, whether or not we write this off.
I'm just saying that that's kind of, it's an awkward solution to, anyway.
Yeah, well, if it would work, I'd say let's do it.
I think, I told Rich I would do this. I would put the double entry accounting on the board to try to make it as simple as possible because I don't think this all works this way. I think if we write something off and we are counting on our fund balance to programs for education and in the general fund, then we're gonna have a gap. And
Well, maybe that's the next step, is as I interpret what you just said, what you could do is you could write down the numbers that would show me why writing off this $47,000 asset would make us short of cash for the following year.
Right.
By that amount.
okay.
And it would be useful for me to understand that, at least to me. I don't think not anywhere else. Yeah.
Well, we can bring it
That's the
back,
next
as,
step.
you know, again, the audit report isn't, are you done, John? I know that we've talked a lot about that particular item. Is there anything else that you wanted to highlight in the audit report? Or are we good to go on before? I do know that we need to talk about since this is a collaborative between the city and the school district, we need to talk about the continuation of their services, correct?
Right. You know, the only other thing I'd point out is our federal awards, there were no findings, no question costs. And that's pretty good. I think overall,
Yep.
Overall, it's a pretty good audit report. It's just, we do have a problem in nutritional services, and this tends to highlight that even more.
Well, your point, John, is really important, really worth emphasizing. And that is, you know, there might be a minor glitch with respect to this issue. But overall, this is a great audit report and an accomplishment for the district and an accomplishment for your office. And I don't mean my trying to fix this blemish.
Right.
Should in any way suggest to the contrary, because it's a really good report.
Oh, thank you.
You know, it really is.
So John, do you want to just cover, given that this audit report is done between the city and the school and kind of our
Right,
current?
this is the last year of R.H.R. Smith's contract, and Bob Rustin asked me to, he said he was gonna get a one-year proposal from Smith's about extending. I do have that, all the terms are the same, except the last 3 years, the cost of the audit's been $18,000. The proposal is to raise it to 19 for the next year. I've budgeted more than that because I was unsure of where we were going. The board, or the city council wants to hear our recommendation. They make the decision the way the charter is, but I would recommend doing that. Given where we are, they've been very responsive. Their field people are great. So that's my 2 cents on it.
John, you think we need an action? We probably should have an action to accept that?
Yes, we recommend, I recommend to city council.
That we are,
That they extend the contract with.
Yes.
R.H. Smith.
R.H. Smith.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Is there a motion to do that?
So moved?
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Transmit that to the city?
yes, we will, thank you.
Okay, thank you. The other thing that was discussed among the three of us is whether we actually wanted to take the time to go through the audit report with the auditor.
That's right.
I don't wanna take another hour and a half of board time to argue with him in front of you. It's too embarrassing for me and it's not very productive. But if there's a feeling that there's things we should examine further, he's happy to be available to us, at least by video conference. Ernie?
Really, I just want to get my head around the nutrition
Yeah.
piece and what we can do moving forward and come up with a plan.
And
Just-
that's really much more
It's so hard to
important than the
understand.
past.
I
Right,
just,
and that's not
yeah.
maybe I mean, other than the issues that are currently at bay on the deficit is one thing, and that can be a conversation with them, but it is more forward-thinking around what are we going to do?
Yeah, the real problem is not an accounting problem.
Right, right.
You know, it's a business problem.
Yeah.
So, I don't hear anybody saying we need to meet with the auditor. No? Okay. That takes us to the agenda for our March 20, 2013 meeting, speaking of nutritional services. No, I had this here somewhere.
Yeah, it's in,
Look at it, cool. There it is. No? Yes. Any comments on this report, on this agenda? Well, it seems jammed full again.
One item, Diane and I think we will have a draft board self-evaluation
Okay.
recommendation,
So that needs to be added.
if you want to add it. Could be very short.
Okay. Are we gonna finish nutritional services, CDC, and impact of state healthcare initiative on the district in 45 minutes?
You know,
I think, you know,
What's the
27,
CDC report?
this Nancy Lavarnway and her career development center.
Development Center, okay.
And we
I
had,
thought it was a Center for Disease Control. I was a little concerned that might take longer. Yeah.
yeah, we do need to add school calendar in here, and so we'll add that in. And under my report will be meet Paul Yoon, but that will be fairly brief with just Karsten.
Number 7 will go pretty quickly, I think.
Yes.
should only take.
with
Yeah.
observations, yeah. Okay.
And do you think it's realistic to think we're gonna have policy D6 in hand for that meeting? It sounds like we're waiting for a lawyer somewhere.
Well, and Wynn has been in communication with Pietro. I don't know specific, but
Well, in fairness, I communicated with him again a week ago.
Yeah.
So since that time, there hasn't really been enough time, but I think by the time we get to March 20, we
We'll
should
have
have
it.
something.
All right, well, it looks like an aggressive schedule, but I guess we're prepared to put up with it? Okay.
Could I make a suggestion on number 11?
If it results in less time than more time, yeah, please.
The future agenda items, and
Yeah.
I mentioned this at a previous meeting, but in an attempt, we should set our annual calendar. And in the past couple of years, we've sort of prioritized.
Yeah,
And just to kind of get some going on some of these, and now that we're, starting our new school board year,
yeah.
would people like to say what their priorities are?
And I think in fairness, we really haven't revisited these, Diane, and, so
Right.
when you look at them, nutritional service deficit is one.
Right.
And you're talking about that, we aren't solidified, we've got city cost sharing issues that, again, Rich has provided some update around some of that work. Crisis planning, you've probably heard, we probably could, I almost say you've satisfied that to some extent. So I think it is good to prioritize, but we probably could update you
Yeah.
and ask whether you're satisfied with where, with some of the information on some of these,
Right, what can we take off and what
Yes.
do we need to talk about sooner
We
than
really,
later?
I mean, I haven't taken anything off, because, nor have I provided you an update on things like I just did, just briefly now, so.
I'd like to add one as well, just to kind of get an update on the feedback loop, feedback process that we had talked about a while ago.
The climate survey is scheduled for April 3rd meeting, even though
April
it's not
3rd,
on.
yeah.
So that's the climate committee update.
That will give you just some,
That'll
feedback, but I don't know if that's exactly what your term, is that kind of what you're thinking? It's the climate survey and the feedback, Diane?
Oh, no, the feedback loop. Remember the
Yeah.
whole idea of
How people
Continuous
provide
improvement.
the
information?
continuous feedback loop? It was the new positive name for it. It
Yes.
started out as the complaint process.
Yep.
and,
Yeah.
Got it.
Just kind of where that's at, and are we using it? Is anybody,
Activating, using,
Yeah.
problem. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
state of
I
the
have a
state?
quick question about, well, I guess it's kind of can come under the future agenda items. You talked earlier tonight about looking into some of the voting information, as far as registered voters, the turnout, et cetera. I'd be happy to look into that, but I think what it's gonna take is somebody who knows Excel spreadsheets. So is there some resource in the school who can work with me for an hour or so to kind of sort that out? And is that something the board wants to have done? It's to try to kind of understand, where the vote's coming from, so we could perhaps get the vote out better next year. It's not a priority,
I
but when
think,
the,
you may want more granular than what I'm thinking. I mean, I would like, just as we did on one of our budget information slides, and it doesn't have to be just the budget information, but we talk about, the data number on, number of individuals income sensitized, and then some of those pieces. I think it would be advantageous for us at a point more regularly to report out about our community, to include participations, so we, almost set a, numbers of absentee ballots, information, from certain locations, number of voters, whom requested, a variety of information, I think would be important to include in here. So I would like to get that.
Right.
If you're willing to actually help, maybe be a conduit between Donna and getting
Yeah,
it
it's
to us,
just-
then
it's-
we'll get it into we'll probably actually plug it into the, a presentation, a spreadsheet, or whatever that gives us the info that we can continue to add to year after year.
I mean, it seems, it's a legitimate area where I think a board member can work a
Yeah.
little bit more on it, because
Absolutely.
it's
We can-
really community input, it's a little
And
broader.
I think right
I'd
now,
be
it's not
happy to do
necessarily
that.
like it's a do now. I mean, if there was something that you said, I need, 10 hours, that would be difficult, but
absolutely.
But if there's
we can make
something,
that work.
but it's gonna need some data manipulation, which I do not have the ability. Maybe I can get my son to do it, but,
We definitely have the
probably
ability to
want,
help with that. If
you
you're
know,
willing to help with that, we can figure that out. They love it when I say we, too.
I have just the person in mind for that.
Okay.
Excellent.
See? Does that satisfy us for tonight on future agenda items? I mean, I guess my reaction, my broader reaction, to your question, Diane, about sort of addressing, developing a plan to deal with future agenda items is that if we're gonna do a retreat, that's an appropriate time at which one of the things we ought to do is to say, all right, what are our priorities among these future agenda
Yeah.
items? What do we, having identified what's most important to members on the board, what do we need to put in place to deal with them?
Yeah.
That'd be my thought.
Yeah, because we just keep adding to it,
Yeah.
and so I think we should have a plan to kind of chip away at it and.
Yep.
Or when we
At
deal
the
with something,
deficit,
you know,
at
to
the-
direct, you know, satisfy the item,
Yep.
yeah. It's good.
Okay, so is that?
Good feedback.
That's agreeable? That takes us to the minutes of February 20th. Are there any amendments, corrections, questions about the February 20 minutes? Hearing none, is there any objection to considering these minutes to have been approved? Without objection, they are approved. Then we have item 18. Shall we go into debt
For a little bit.
for a little while? Do you want to explain, or does John want to explain this issue to the board? I think we know what we're talking about, but.
This is not an uncommon, although we've been able to not have to do this as much when we've had a larger fund balance. But this is, again, a need to borrow a tax anticipation note to cover payroll. So, John, anything to add to that?
No, we received the money April 5th, and we're just a little short of being able to cover everything.
So-
It's certainly a very attractive interest rate.
Yes, and this is the first time that Peoples has submitted the low bid in a long time. We've gone with merchants for 3 years now, so.
So, is there a motion to accept the administration's recommendation that we agree to the proposal of People's United Bank to lend us some $1,450,000 on a tax anticipation note covering March 11 through April 15 at an interest rate of 1.75%?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Please hang around long enough to sign the note. We all have the pleasure of signing in our representative capacities. Just so we're clear. The consent agenda is done. Are there any comments about the payable orders? Any announcements
Yeah, I have two. I actually put them by your side, or more than
at our place? Yeah.
at your place. Just, you know, we previously reported the real world design state winners, but there are moving on, and we have a date now that they'll be April 19th to the 22nd. And it's the group that's called First Class, the student team. And one of the individuals is Noah Bugby. And maybe Diane, could you help me with some of these names so I enunciate them more clearly?
Oh, sure.
Because since you probably know them a little bit better than I do.
So there's Ronak Bhagat, Noah, Neil Desai, Matt Gilmartin, Rahan Kabir, Vishnu Premsankar, and Forrest Sharma.
Will all be part of representing us in Washington DC, so we're congratulations to them.
When do they do that?
April 19th through the 22nd.
Oh, pretty close.
Again, just letting you know about some upcoming things right around the corner. March 7th is tomorrow night, where the agency is actually hosting community dinners for regional educators, business leaders, and community members to discuss ways to develop and promote innovative educational practices at the high school level. So they're going to be traveling around to do that. I apologize for not getting that out to you earlier. We'll be hosting that tomorrow night. There are other locations. If you wanted to attend, you could certainly do that. So anyway, I let you know that, and I just want to let you know that I think we should have a conversation. We don't have to have it now, but I'm going to be, I have a professional development opportunity through my university, who've asked me to go and be part of a leadership piece to travel around, which is a neat situation. You go to 2 battlefields and talk about leadership development or leadership decisions that happen. So that will be happening April 3rd through the 5th. My recommendation is that we keep the 3rd on, but we'll limit April 3rd agenda, where we'll have some presentations for you, and it will be less needy of me. So you don't have to, and then we'll talk about that next time, but I'm just wanting to give you a little update that I'll be away, and I think it's, number one, it's paid for by my, the folks that have requested that I go, and I think it is a good opportunity. We'll also be meeting with Pat Lancioni, who's, if you haven't had the opportunity to read his book on The Advantage, and talking about, specifically about organizational health in your employment area. So I just want to, we'll talk more about that next time, but we'll probably be reworking the April 3rd board meeting agenda. So that's all I have for announcements.
Well, that relates to my announcement, which is that I cannot be present at the April 17 board meeting, because I'll be in Washington that week.
You were thinking you could maybe join those students, didn't you?
Well, I'm going to be there the 19th, too.
But the 17th, we'll make note of that and see what's going on. But does anybody else have problems with that at the present time? All right.
And I have one announcement, which is the Rebels advanced to the semifinals.
Hey, good. I was going to try to see if I could see
So,
Patrick usually is tweeting and I'm sure you get a message.
I got a message from Julie.
Thank you for that.
Okay. That takes us to adjournment, unless there's another announcement.
That's all I have.
Motion to adjourn. Second? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Please stay to autograph this promissory note, which we don't have Julie's signature on.